Unosip is not around, Chair.
She's not around.
Okay, all right, Chairperson.
Uyakwazi ukuhost.
Angikwazi. Angaze ngizame. Ngamane kube disaster namhlanje.
Yeah.
Okay, so
yeah, we're just about 1 minute to go.
Yes.
I was just watching TV now. I heard an SABC journalist, some girl saying they saw me getting into Pietermaritzburg court with a big SUV, German SUV. I don't know what you call that. Did you hear that?
There we go. Okay.
It's your maiden presentation, so you do have a minute extra.
Well, thank you very much. Okay, honourable members, this is quite a narrow and focused submission in which we urge Parliament to review just 2 decisions that the National Treasury has made in its budget, both of which are contained in the DSD budget allocation. First is the decision to limit the child support grant increase to just 10 rand.
Okay, sorry for that, Catherine.
All right. The first decision is the one to limit the child support grant increase to just 10 rand a month extra, with no further increases in the current financial year, allowing it to fall behind food price inflation. And I'll talk about why this is so very problematic. Second is the decision to further reduce the beneficiary numbers and budget for the foster child grant, while not budgeting for the parallel introduction of a child support grant top-up for orphans living with relatives. And this is as was planned in terms of the required comprehensive legal solution to the foster care crisis. Both of these decisions are regressive and are punitive to vulnerable children. In terms of the structure of this presentation, I'll provide a brief context on each matter to show how the budget has failed children, and I'll end by outlining our recommendations to remedy these matters in the current budget and the cost implications of that. Honourable members, we live in a country of great inequality and poverty. Children often bear the brunt of it, even though their suffering is often invisible. South Africa has a huge burden of child malnutrition. Malnutrition has been described as a form of slow violence that systematically destroys a child's developing body and brain, damaging their health, education, and later their employment prospects. It not only infringes on children's well-being and their right to survival and development, it also perpetuates the cycle of poverty and inequality across generations and into the future. In our written submission, we refer to many studies that demonstrate the extent of child malnutrition. These include, before the arrival of COVID-19 and the economic effects of lockdown, already 1 in 3 children lived in households below the food poverty line. 27% of young children were stunted due to chronic malnutrition, literally too short for their age. And this is a situation which is difficult to rectify later. 50% of child deaths in hospitals in 2018 were associated with malnutrition. There's been a huge amount of evidence emerging in the wake of of COVID and lockdown, including rising unemployment, which you are well aware of, which in terms of the expanded definition has breached the 40% mark, a net increase of jobs, rising food prices, and we've seen an increase in reported child hunger, particularly after the top-ups and caregiver allowance stopped. Hunger rates are now their highest in over a decade. And there's been extensive media coverage about this. These kind of headlines will be familiar to you. So I'm just here to remind us that this is evidence-based. This is not fake news. It's very real, and it's based on what is happening in this country and to children, and it needs a response. Now, many of you are familiar with the grant structure and what happened with the top-ups during 2020, but I'm going to outline it quickly just to point out what it meant for women and children in particular. So this slide gives us a picture of the status quo as we went into lockdown. And as you can see, these are the values, the monthly values of the grants. The child support grant was a much smaller amount than any other grant and the only one below the food poverty line. It's also, interestingly, the most pro-poor of all the grants because of its means test. So although it's targeted to children, it effectively reaches 3/4 of all households in the poorest income decile. And it also reaches around 80% of households that rely on income from informal employment. What happened was that the disaster relief package announced by the President in late April 2020 included a 300 Rand top-up to the child support grant for just 1 month in May. And you see it there marked in red, bringing it above the food poverty line. This reached 13 million children on the child support grant, and it was also the most efficient available mechanism to transfer much needed cash into millions of highly vulnerable households. Other grants each received a 250 Rand top-up, and the special SRD of 350 was launched for working age adults without access to income or social insurance, and this also was an important development. A month later in June, the CSG top-up was stopped and the CSG returned to its pre-lockdown level. A new caregiver allowance of 500 Rand was introduced, reaching just over 7 million caregivers who received the CSGs for their children. This was cheaper for the state than providing a top-up to each CSG. It also meant that for the first time, poor women who care for children could spend some of the grant on their own needs without being criticised. The caregiver allowance and the other grant top-ups continued until October, at which point the planned disaster relief period ended. Then from November, the top-ups to the existing grants were stopped and grants returned to their normal value. This in itself created a financial shock. Around 7.2 million women were receiving CSGs for children in their care. By definition, these women are poor. They must pass a low means test to qualify for the CSG. The CSG top-up and the caregiver grant were found to be the most effective poverty reduction measures. Both were stopped. Only the COVID SRD continued due to an urgent intervention to extend it until January 2021 and then again until April 21. This shows that when there is political will, it is possible to find additional budget, even where it has been said that none existed. But caregivers were not allowed to apply for the SRD. They and their children had to survive on a child grant of 450 Rand, which is not enough to feed a single child. The high levels of child malnutrition and stunting need to be addressed urgently. The quickest and most effective way to do this is to increase the value of cash transfers for children. Even before COVID-19, 3 international human rights supervisory bodies recommended that the South African government increase the CSG amount to the food poverty line as a minimum. Locally, the expert committee on mitigating the VAT increase made a similar recommendation. The Minister of Social Development has acknowledged the inequity in the grant structure and said the CSG needs to be increased. And in fact, she said it again even when presenting the budget vote yesterday. And the President too has said that this is important. It has also been made clear that even in the context of a national economic crisis, the CSG should not be eroded. Here is an excerpt from the judgment in the equal education case on school nutrition that happened last year. The High Court referred to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which South Africa has signed and ratified. The committee's general comment on budgeting makes it clear that states should not take regressive measures in relation to socioeconomic rights. The court concluded that even in times of economic crisis, regressive measures may only be considered after assessing all other options and ensuring that children are the last to be affected, especially those in vulnerable situations. However, despite this context, the CSG budget was not increased, but has instead been decreased in real terms, a move that is specifically prohibited under international law. When the 2020 budget and the MTEF was presented to Parliament in February last year, nobody imagined the public health crisis that was about to unfold. Sorry, I've lost the screen. Sorry, one moment. Oh, there we are. That was about to unfold, or the devastating effect it would have on the economy. Here is a picture of what the budget for the current and next year looked like in the 2020 estimates of national expenditure, with the child support grant prioritized on the top. But the changes in the MTF grant allocations show that the budget has been taken away from grant recipients, and this is across the board. These are people who, by definition, are identified as being in need of social protection. In this year's budget speech, the Minister of Finance said that from April, the child support grant would be 460 Rand a month. This was a 10 Rand increase from last year, but a 10 Rand per month lower increase than the amount forecast for 21 in the February 2020 budget documents. And unlike previous years, there is no budget for a second increase in October. It is an increase of 3.4% based on the average value of the child support grant last year. Headline inflation was 3.2% over 2020, so perhaps it seems reasonable, but that headline inflation index is based on the all items index, which also includes items that are incurred only by wealthier households, like operating private cars and going to stay in hotels. The CSG is specifically targeted to the poor and is meant to support the nutritional costs of a child. It makes more sense then to index the grant increase against food inflation. Food inflation over the same period was much higher, closer to 6%. And to keep pace with food inflation, the CSG should be at least 470 Rand now. This is the amount that was previously allocated. Instead, the CSG has been defunded by 10 Rand per grant per month. in the 2021 budget, creating a total of 1.6 billion rand in savings to the state, but at huge cost to poor children's nutrition and development. And here is a graph which plots the actual CSG values against the national food poverty line over the last decade. The values projected for the next 3 years, as per the current budget, are likely to increase the gap between the CSG and the cost of food, making it even more difficult for children to grow and thrive. The current budget is explicit. It admits that there is a projected decrease in spending on social grants amounting to 36 billion rand over the MTEF period, and that this is despite a projected increase of 300,000 in the overall number of grant beneficiaries each year, and most of these additional beneficiaries are children receiving the CSG. This cartoon is based on a photograph that Kevin Carter took in the Sudan during the famine in 1993, and it sent shockwaves through the world. This version, that was published in May when the budget came out in South Africa, depicts the callousness of a government that regards the lives of children as being a matter of budget trade-offs. We do not want this vulture coming home to roost in South Africa. So what can be done? Well, ideally, the situation we would look for would be full employment and decent wages. That's the ultimate solution. But we've not made substantial improvements in either of these areas over 27 years, and there's persistent gender equality. So then, in the interim, what is needed is a system of comprehensive social protection that guarantees an adequate basic income for all, including the unemployed. We support this, and we understand that DSD is working on a basic income grant policy document now. But for now, our primary concern is for children who need to grow and develop. They will be the next generation of parents, and there's no time to lose. So a short-term target must be to align the CSG with the food poverty line as a minimum value. This requires a substantial increase and would amount to an extra 20 billion rand a year in the social assistance budget. This may not be possible in the current year. So more immediately, within this year, the CSG has lost its real value. Children will become more malnourished, and there needs to be an urgent remedy. At the very least, we're proposing a 10 rand increase in October to offset inflation and prevent regression. And there is strong precedent for this. In 7 out of the last 10 years, it was the CSG alone that usually received a second increase in October. And in the years when it did not, it had a substantial increase in April. So this is our proposal for the CSG, and at the end I will give you the cost implications of that. I'd like to quickly just touch on the second issue that we are bringing before this committee today, which is the issue of the foster care crisis. It's quite complex and has been discussed extensively in the Social Development Committee. But I'll just give you a brief outline of what it's about and what the solution is. The crisis arises from a conflation of categories of children who need to be in care and protection and placed in foster care. The foster care system in South Africa was really designed around what we call classic foster care. This is for children who have been removed from their families because of abuse or neglect or awaiting adoption, and they then become wards of the state. If they were not in foster care, they would be in institutions, but it is preferable to place children in a family environment, and this is what social workers do, and it goes through the courts, and there's a foster care order from the children's court, and it's quite a process. It also requires regular supervision and review and is meant to be temporary. This is what the foster care system was designed for, but increasingly over the last, over 10 years and more, in fact closer to 20, the system has been used for orphaned children who are living with relatives, with their own family. Now, there are many children in South Africa who are cared for by family members other than their parents, whether or not their parents are alive. A child who is orphaned and abandoned but is being cared for by family, we argue, is not in need of state care and protection, obviously, because they are in the care of the family, and yet the system has increasingly been used for this, and it's put a huge burden on the system. And now, over 80% of current foster care cases consist of these children. What happened chronologically is that in the early 2000s, when there were increasing deaths due to HIV, relatives caring for orphan children were encouraged to apply for foster care because, and they did so because foster care was more than 3 times the value of the child support grant. Now, we're not criticizing them for coming forward to claim bigger grants. They need the money. They're looking after children who are not their own, and these families mostly are very poor. But the foster care is a labor-intensive system because it is a system of alternative care, and it couldn't cope with the number of cases. In 2011, over 120,000 foster child grants lapsed. That was nearly a quarter of all the grants. And another 300,000 were at imminent risk because they had not been reviewed and extended by the courts and had the social worker reviews performed on them. They simply couldn't keep up. Child protection services suffered as well because of capacity problems. The case went to the High Court in a court with the Centre for Child, in a case with the Centre for Child Law, and the High Court ordered the department to design and implement a comprehensive legal solution by 2014. This process was delayed for many years as the DSD sought extensions to the deadline and used its available resources rather to chase the foster care backlog. And this graph just gives you a sense of what it looked like. There's a tail that goes back in time here of children who were in foster care. And here you see the rapid uptake as during the HIV epidemic. And here the grants started lapsing, the court order came in, and then the grant numbers fall off, not because it doesn't need to reach more people, but children. In fact, it would need to double its number to reach the number of orphans living with kin. But there were fewer new placements, partly because of low capacity and also because most placements, which take a long time to process, are orphans who are older children and then age out each year. So there's a huge drop off each year. What to do about this? Well, the comprehensive solution is almost complete. It comes in 2 parts. The first part was an amendment to the Social Assistance Act to enable a top-up to the CSG for orphans living with family members. And this went through Parliament last year, and it was assented to by the President in December. The second part is an amendment to the Children's Act to clarify the eligibility criteria for the protection system and foster care. And this is currently before Parliament. We were in the hearings on this a couple of weeks ago, and that will go through Parliament this year. But it is already possible to introduce a child support grant top-up. It requires budget. It has also been something that South Africa has committed to explicitly in its recent report to the United Nations Committee on Social and Economic and Cultural Rights, where it is clear that there is an intention to introduce it in April from 2021. But we see nothing for it in the budget. The budget shows a clear intention to reduce access to the foster child grant, which is what is needed in order to free up capacity. But there's no commensurate intention to introduce the necessary replacement grant in the form of the CSG top-up in the CSG line item. And this is regressive. It can be rectified through an adjustment in the October medium-term budget policy statement to provide the necessary budget for the introduction of a CSG top-up for orphaned children living with relatives. So in summary, this is what we are asking in budget terms. The top line here gives you the current child support grant budget, which includes the 10 Rand increase, and the budget for 13.3 million children over the 12 months is 73 billion Rand. We are asking for, in addition to this, as an urgent remedy, a 10 Rand increase in the CSG from October, which comes to just under 800 million Rand, and provision for the gradual uptake of the CSG top-up for orphans, which over 6 months, which comes to another 260 million Rand. The total budget requirement then is just over 1 billion Rand, which is small in the scheme of things, but has substantial multiplier effects. The small increase in the CSG simply helps to offset inflation and protect 13 million children against rising poverty. The CSG top-up is a cost-effective reform that we've committed to. The grant is lower than the foster child grant, but will reach more orphans. And it also has the effect of reducing social worker caseloads, freeing up capacity to provide better quality protection services for all. In conclusion, then, honourable members, the Constitution and international law give very strong protection of children's rights. we're calling on Parliament to protect the poorest and most vulnerable in our society from the erosion of social grants that sustain them, especially in this time of crisis. And Parliament can correct the regressive steps for children in the current budget by ensuring that just a little more than 1 billion is allocated in the October budget. And you have the amounts there. And that's the end of our presentation. Thank you very much for giving us this opportunity.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. Thank you, and you are right on time. And we are noting your presentation. Okay. Can we go to organization and doing tax abuse outside? Who's there today?
Good morning, Chair. I am here.
Hi. Morning. You'll time yourself. You know how we do it.
Yes, I will. Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Is that visible?
Very much so. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chairperson. Good morning, and good morning to all the honourable members and colleagues. We really appreciate the opportunity, and thank you for 20 minutes. It's very generous compared to what we usually get. Make sure I have control. Sorry, Chairperson, I'm just struggling with this thing.
Problem.
Is that full screen?
It's a full screen. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chair. I'm not going to speak too much about the context of COVID-19. As you alluded to in your introduction, the issues of unemployment and the acute fiscal constraints that we're facing. I take those contextual factors as granted. And we also take the full submission as read. So this is going to be the sequence of the presentation. And I'm going to start with a few broad principles and get to particular votes that we would like to use as examples, Chair, in demonstrating the principles that I'm talking about. So the basic premise and the issue that we want to raise is that reprioritization is not happening. I can very much relate to the previous presentation, honourable members, in that government is talking the talk, but it's not walking the walk. And rates go up, but we do not get much back in the way of public services. And this is a serious issue that's been presented here, I think, quite repetitively. And Chairperson, you'll excuse me because much of what I'm going to say, I think I've said before, and I think members of this committee are very much aware of, but that's part of the problem. But let me get into it. What we've seen in the reprioritization process until now is a shift of government spending towards a self-sustaining priority. And we don't understand that, Chairperson. We're thinking about major liabilities, and please go through these recommendations at your leisure. I just wanted to start with them in the event that we run out of time. And I'll cover each one of them in detail. But we do think that government spending is now more constrained than ever. And this appropriations bill perhaps is one of the most important we've ever had, given the very serious constraints that we're facing. And we think it's very important to justify the reprioritization process and to ensure that it's progressive and to ensure that wasteful expenditure and expenditure on items that have not really hit their targets are eliminated. And that's going to be the essence of what I'm saying today. So the way we think that should be done is through allocative and productive efficiency. But of these two, we really want to prioritize allocative efficiency. And that means eliminating activities that are not necessary. And the reason for us suggesting that that should be prioritized is because we don't have time, Chairperson and honorable members, we don't have time to discuss incremental adjustments. There needs to be a radical change to how money is spent. And we know of the systemic problems in government spending, and it's become very obvious, it's become very widely known that money spent in government really isn't bringing the benefits to people's lives that we would like to see. So for this to happen, of course, there needs to be political will to reprioritize policy objectives. And that means admitting some failures, and that means making some sacrifices because our resources are extremely constrained, and that's something that we cannot escape from. So the principle in the first place is zero-based budgeting that's been put forward. It sounds good, honorable members, but it's something that needs to be implemented very quickly. We do think that Parliament has a role to play in that. And it certainly isn't a silver bullet, but we do think that it's something that can help identify spending priorities in a systematic way, in a way that makes sense, in a way that people buy into, in a way that's not arbitrary and made by central government on its own. And we basically support it, honorable members, and we think that Parliament really can play a stronger role in ensuring that it is implemented quickly and in a systematic way. And there's more detail on this in our written presentation. We must speak about SOE bailouts, and we think this is one of the biggest risks in the current budget, given very limited prospects of revenue. This is something that needs to be addressed. And so we've quantified that. And as you can see, it's become an enormous sum. And we recognize the special appropriations bill that's going to come to this committee soon, or at least the public hearings that are going to be held soon. And we'll also make a presentation there. But we do think that these special appropriations bills need to be halted. Planning for this kind of expenditure needs to be done at the very beginning of the budget cycle, and there needs to be clear rationales for why this money is spent. And this is in particular why we think that's the case. Debt servicing costs is spiraling out of control, and we understand, we all know, it's the fastest growing line item. And in the context, for example, of the previous presentation, there's a great need for government expenditure to be as effective and efficient as possible. And as long as debt servicing costs are increasing, primarily in our view as a result of SOE bailouts and the like, we're really not going to hit our developmental targets, and human rights will not be preserved. So in terms of public governance improvements, members, we understand that the wage bill is being capped, and there's a lot of controversy about that. But does that really go far enough? We don't think so. In terms of what comes from the remuneration of public servants, that really needs to be relooked at as well. And we note the Department of Public Service and Administration and its amendments to the existing laws that govern public servants. But those amendments need to be made urgently, and they need to be implemented once they're made to ensure that the money spent on remuneration really brings value to people on the ground. And this also means to us, at least, to act against wrongdoers. And we've quantified, just as an example of how much money is spent to no effect, how many public servants have been put on suspension with pay. Of course, then there's no service delivery as a result of those monies paid. And the Labour Relations Act does protect people. But honourable members and chair, we really are aware, and we've discussed this at length, of corruption and maladministration in the public service. And this needs to be taken into account in the application of the Labour Relations Act. So something radical we want to propose is to cut cabinet by approximately 20%. When this dispensation came into power, it did promise a consolidation of cabinet, it did promise a consolidation of government, but we're not seeing that happening, Chairperson, we're not. The changes to the budget year on year are incremental. They are not radical. And the amalgamation of one or two departments really does not go far enough in our view. And perhaps Parliament can play a stronger role in ensuring that this actually happens. Those departments that must continue to exist, that are really essential to government function, those should be relooked at to see that money spent there really does achieve the intended objectives. In terms of line items, Chairperson, it's difficult to put this to you here in this committee, and it might not be fair, because we're talking about granular issues. And in many instances, I think this would be better put to portfolio committees in their budget review and recommendation reporting processes. But those are not inclusive, so we don't have an opportunity to go there and really say what we think about particular departments and their agencies and how money is spent there. So we don't think that there's enough space for scrutiny at this level of detail, but it's something that we would like to raise to this committee. And again, in terms of remuneration, does it correlate with performance? In terms of expenditure on office space, does that really benefit the public in any tangible way? And this comes to the issue of priorities. And I've raised this in the beginning. We see, for example, that Statistics SA is not getting additional money that it says it desperately needs. And we think that these kinds of facts that an organization like Statistics SA can produce can inform government planning and decision-making. As I said before, to really instill trust in the public that government is taking decisions in its best interest, and that it's doing so based on evidence rather than political whims. But Statistics SA will not get additional funding. Rather, the State Security Agency will get more funding. And this really goes unquestioned. And we don't understand, honorable members, what kind of priorities does this reflect? And on what basis are these decisions taken? We don't understand. We do not agree with this, especially considering the revelations that have come in recent months and years. Opposing corruption is something that we think more money should be allocated to. It's one of the few things, Chairperson, that we're recommending more money be spent on, particularly because we think that if the MPA, the SIU and SARS was given more resources to do their work, that more money would actually be returned to government, money that has been stolen from the public purse, and illicit financial flows more generally. It's been quantified and estimated, but we really don't know just how big that number is. What we do know is that it's a large number, that if these institutions were given the resources they need, that we might actually see a profit from that and more money for government to spend on essential social services. And in terms of the National Anti-Corruption Strategy, honorable members, it might not be the right place to say this, but that's something that needs to be finalized and implemented. It's 6 years that it's been going, and we don't really see any action being taken there. So coming to something that we haven't discussed before in our presentations is Vote 2, Parliament. And here we really have a strong view in that Parliament is supposed to be an example of sound financial oversight, but we've not seen that. We've looked at constituency officers as the sort of mouthpiece that communities have to get their issues to the agenda in Parliament. And we try to really look at how much money is being spent there, but we haven't had full view of exactly how political parties spend this money, honorable members. And we've requested this from chief whips, and we would really appreciate it if this committee can do the same. I'm not sure whether chief whips will respond, but smaller parties have shared their data with us. And in the spirit of the Funding of Political Parties Act, we do believe that this information should be forthcoming and that parliamentarians should be accountable to their constituencies in terms of money spent. So this is something that we think can go a long way in really giving the public some confidence that Parliament is accountable and that it does not waste money. And to that effect, we also want to recommend that there's a platform to be established to ensure that public commitments made by MPs, whether it be in their constituencies or in their committees, that those can be followed up and that we can make sure that there's actually action coming from these promises. Then on cooperative governance, honorable members, we all know this is an extremely dire situation. And only 8% of municipalities have received a clean audit in 2018-19. 80% of municipal debt is not being collected, despite agreements being made between ESCOM and municipalities, and there needs to be serious intervention. SCOPA cannot do this on its own, and we think there needs to be a concerted effort in Parliament to ensure that this is remedied. Further, we really think that at that level of government, and this probably has something to do with the provincial treasuries as well, not just Parliament, and provincial COCTA as well, that has to carry out oversight of what's happening in municipalities, and that means consequences for people who are not doing what they're supposed to be doing, people especially who are in positions of executive and accounting authority. And we know there are procurement issues, and we're really looking forward to the public procurement bill in that regard. Chairperson, we would like that to be expedited if possible, and we've seen what National Treasury has said. In any case, we do think there needs to be better cooperation between National Treasury and COPTA. Thus far, it seems like there's been major disagreement, for example, around the remuneration of municipal managers. And there needs to be a kind of a humble approach coming from local government and SALGA about exactly what money is spent on at that level, honorable members. It's not just about the absolute number that's appropriated to local government through the various mechanisms, but it's about what's done at that level and whether the numbers that reach local government as a whole really corresponds to what individual municipalities are doing. In terms of transport, we've noted in the finance committees that the fuel levy has been increased for the road accident fund. And Chairperson, I don't think we can emphasize enough, right behind ESCOM, this is the next catastrophe waiting to happen. But more money is being allocated there without serious questioning. There was a road accident benefit scheme on the cards, and that seems to have been withdrawn. And there's no real alternative solution on the table. So we're very concerned. We think that if the fuel levy is increased as it has been, that should rather be used for capital expenditure. In terms of public procurement, public-private partnerships, we've taken issue with Sunroll's relationship with its private tolling concessionaires, Chairperson. These concessionaires actually provide a public service on government's behalf, but there's no public accountability. We don't know what the financial arrangements are between Sunroll and these tolling concessionaires, and we think that the public has a good right to see at least how much money is flowing into these companies, how much is flowing back to government, and how much is actually being spent on maintaining and improving roads, as opposed to being absorbed as profit. In the rail sector, it's another example, Chair, of money being spent without really tangible, visible outcomes for that expenditure. And it's something that needs to be prioritized. In that sense, we're very much looking forward to the Economic Regulation of Transport Bill and what that regulator can do. On vote 30, Chair, my colleagues are of the view that the indicators for this department's performance are meaningless. We've seen this consistent delay in the release of digital spectrum, digital migration issue, and so much money being wasted in the process of that delay. And really, there needs to be some intervention. There needs to be much greater access to internet connectivity in South Africa, and data needs to be affordable. Coming to a bigger issue, mineral resources and energy. So again, this is in the context of COVID and how the budgets were distorted as a result of COVID. But we've seen, again, the reprioritization taking place in this department is not sensible in our view. Nuclear energy is still receiving a certain amount of funding, whilst 5.5, and this is according to the Public Affairs Research Institute, 5.5 million indigent households are not receiving their fair allocation of electricity through the FBE appropriation. And this is something that we really think needs to be scrutinized, Chairperson. We raised this last year, but it's a continuing pattern, and we don't think that it's sustainable. Of course, if there's less money to be spent, indigent households need to be prioritized rather than government agencies like NEXA. In the same sense, money is continuously, albeit at a reduced level, allocated to the Radioactive Waste Management Fund, and we don't understand this, Chairperson. There are legal requirements that should be in place for this money to be continuously allocated, and that simply is not there. Coming towards the end, water and sanitation. This is probably the best example of money being spent to little or no effect. And if you look at the figure that we've shared here, the targets and practical measurements of whether the money spent is translating into, for example, the bucket eradication program and its success, the measurements do not make sense. And it doesn't seem as though there's parity between the levels of expenditure, appropriations year on year, and what's actually happening on the ground. And whether it be with the Portfolio Committee on Water and Sanitation that we've, Human Settlements, Water and Sanitation, that we've really tried to engage with. We really think that this committee can do something to intervene here. And if it's really in the domain of the Portfolio Committee, then perhaps these committees can cooperate with some inclusion of public voices to say, yeah, money has been spent, but nothing has really happened on the ground, and there needs to be a resolution as to why that's the case. Thank you very much, Chairperson. That's me.
Thank you, Mr. Johnston. Let's see, who am I having now? Can I have, thank you for that presentation. We'll have Public Service Accountability Monitor.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, honorable members. Thank you, colleagues. I'll just share my screen as well.
Please just introduce yourself again, ma'am.
I will do so right now. Morning, everybody. My name is Andile Cele, and I'll be representing the Public Service Accountability Monitor this morning. My colleague, Zuki Fagoda, is also on the call. She will not be joining part of the presentation, but probably the answering question session later. Chair, as you can hear, I am struggling with a cold, but this was an important presentation for us, for me to take the time and to make the time to be here this morning. So I will be sipping water throughout. And so if we can extend my time by about 2 minutes, just to allow me to drink some water throughout, that would be fantastic.
Okay,
And to get going. Thanks, Jay. Yeah. So before we start, just as a point of introduction, but I'm sure you do know the PSAM because we've made these presentations and the submissions for quite a while to the committee. We form part of the School of Journalism and Media Studies at Rhodes University in Makanda. And the PSAM's activities include research, monitoring, advocacy, and capacity building. But I'd just like to note that this presentation and our submission, the longer submission, presents a slight departure from previous inputs that we've made to this and other committees on appropriations, in that it places greater emphasis on both the budget process and the budget oversight work of Parliament and the legislators. And we also propose some mechanisms by which the limitations of participation can be addressed. As a PSAM, we believe that social accountability places an explicit duty on members of the executive arm of government, on public officials and the private service providers to justify their decisions and performance regarding the manner in which their use of public resources has affected the progressive realization of socioeconomic rights, and contributing to strengthen oversight over public resources by Parliament and the provincial legislatures constitutes an important aspect of the PSAM's objectives. In recent years, decision-making processes by the executive in relation to public finances has come under close scrutiny, and concerns have been raised by various civic actors about the regressive nature of fiscal policy resulting from a closed and unresponsive budget process. And however, the role of Parliament and its ability to effectively draw on the voices of the public and civil society has continued to come under scrutiny, whereas various civil society coalitions and organizations have characterized the legislators' performance as ineffective and at times opaque. This is a growing call from civil society for improved oversight and consideration of inputs made by the public during these processes. And these concerns are reiterated in this submission and presentation. The PSAM supports these calls not only to increase the space for public input on fiscal policy and oversight, but for the development of a progressive mechanism by which the public can contribute in advance to budget decisions being taken and receive timely feedback. Sorry, I'm just going to move this person. By ensuring public participation is a fundamental component of developing responsive, rights-based discourses. The link between the budget and human rights is supported by various international and local standards. And our longer submission does go into those kinds of detail. But for this particular presentation, I'd like to draw on the Constitution, where in section 195, places an obligation on the state to ensure that members of the public are included in the formulation and implementation of policy. For these decisions, there are various points within the budget cycle in which the executive can be held to account and obliged to explain and justify the use of public resources in the ways chosen. While questions of allocation and expenditure are important, we believe that greater emphasis should be placed on public participation and scrutiny throughout the entire fiscal cycle. And the PSAM urges legislators to proactively foster public participation in the formulation, implementation, and evaluation of fiscal policy and budgets themselves. I'd just like to draw our attention to the International Budget Partnerships release of the ODS, which is it's an instrumental, which is a tool that measures accountability and transparency and public participation across the budget cycle. And in their release last year on outcomes on the 2019 review, South Africa's transparency scores was the highest. We got 87 out of 100. However, public participation continues to receive very low scores. And in last year's result was 24 out of 100. And I'd just like to point that even though this is an aggregated score across the four parts or 4 points of the budget cycle, and the legislative process or participation process received the highest score, which was, I think, was in the 50s. But as an average, the whole participation process got 24 out of 100. This indicator measures the formal opportunities offered to the public for meaningful participation in the different stages of the budget process. But in relation to oversight, so South Africa scored 83, and this particular indicator examines the role that legislators and Supreme Audit Institutes, which in our case is the Auditor General, and the role they play in the budget process and the extent to which they provide oversight. Each country is scored on a scale from 0 to 100 and based on 18 equally weighted indicators. I'd just like to note that transparency alone is insufficient for improving governance, but inclusive public participation is crucial for realizing the positive outcomes associated with greater budget transparency. So throughout my presentation, I will be saying recommendations on each point of focus. There will be 3. There's the participation element, there is the budget expenditure efficiency element, and then there's the procurement element as well. In ways that Parliament can strengthen transparency, there are multiple ways in which Parliament itself can foster greater transparency in order to strengthen the development agenda. There's a call for sector budget transparency, a call for provincial treasuries to ensure timely reporting of expenditure at the subnational level, as well push for statewide open data publication and reporting, as well as support for the development of open fiscal data. There's also room to collaborate with civil society and academia, which has a potential to support innovation to address some of the problems listed above. National Treasury's collaboration with civil society to develop an online open access database of geospatial infrastructure data to complement the publication of open data, budget data via Vulezimali is an important enabler of oversight. And just to say more about this particular database, it provides data on approximately 17,000 public infrastructure projects, ranging from schools, hospitals to boreholes even. And this is in addition to the publication of budgeted and actual expenditure data by provinces, departments, or programs dating back to 2016-17. We just like to point that data is only useful if it is used. And we just like to urge the parliamentary committee researchers to utilize this data to complement the research and oversight duties, particularly during this time where physical oversight visits to thousands of facilities across the country is impractical, or during COVID is impossible. And just drawing back on ways that Parliament can strengthen public participation. Presently, members of the public are able to, through appropriations committees and others, to raise issues of concern and, in theory, influence deliberations of the committee in which turn propose amendments to the budget. The influence of the public on committees in this regard and of committees themselves on the budget has been limited at best. And despite the powers of amendment afforded to Parliament by the Money Bill amendment procedures and related Matters Act, it is notable that no amendment proposals have been tabled since the bill's introduction. And so the PSAM recommends that the committee engages Parliament's public education process. I am missing a slide here. Sorry about that. Yeah, I'll go back. So I'll just continue on this point. So the PSAM recommends that the committee engages Parliament's Public Education Office to develop concurrent public education and participation mechanisms, specifically targeting greater public knowledge of and more informed engagement with the appropriations and related committees. This can be done by incorporating at least 3 of these processes that we have proposed. Improve access to information, strengthen public education, and incorporate some participation mechanisms. And the next slide will go into more detail about these various participation mechanisms. These can be public participation of officers, where they can provide a point of contact for citizens to get information, share concerns, and submit proposals. And the previous presenter touched on constituency officers, and these could play that particular role. But as he highlighted, we haven't seen the effectiveness of those particular officers as getting direct input from communities to the parliamentary agenda. You can also introduce ad hoc meetings or workshops with civil society organizations. Parliament can, in this way, establish partnerships with civil society and community-based organizations to receive briefings or workshops hosted by these organizations on their area of expertise, so as to build parliamentary skills and knowledge on a particular subject. And also through focus groups, where Parliament committees can arrange facilitated discussions with geographically diverse focus groups on specific legislative proposals. These can help highlight the public's main concerns in relation to the issue at hand and gauge public opinion on proposed reforms. This will be my water break. I also like to highlight some recommendations on spending efficiency. Our proposal goes into more detail on the health and education sector, in particular a program within the education sector, a CD, which I'm sure the Equal Education submission does touch on as well. But for this presentation, I'd just like to highlight that our health and education systems continue to reflect very high levels of inequality. The least disadvantaged are left to use sectors and use services that are strained, and whereas the wealthiest have access to private health services. And it's quite critical for us to be able to measure the extent to which health and education systems are meeting the country's needs to reverse historical injustices. And this is influenced by the ability to effectively track how and where resources are actually spent. In order for Parliament to help strengthen spending efficiency, the committee has the opportunity to request to National Treasury to provide detailed disaggregate information on budget estimates within the administrative and functional classifications for health and education at provincial levels, and to improve the use by provinces of websites and portals such as Vulegi Mali, to share this information in machine-readable open data formats that facilitate uptake and use by civil society, to ensure that this aggregated budget information indicates proposed, approved, and actual spending using consistent formats to allow the comparison of expenditures across the budget cycle, including transfers for sector spending through extra budgetary funds. We also encourage the committee to request National Treasury to explain the links between policies, budgets, and performance, and to provide strong performance frameworks for indicators, for targets, and for outcomes, and to link to public spending that allow for the tracking of funds against performance targets, which may include more comprehensive performance reporting frameworks in budget documents and provide clear explanations of the links between policies and budgets, between budgets and actual spending, and finally between spending and the results that we finally see. Procurement. I'm going to touch a bit on background of procurement and some recommendations that the committee can take. As a starting point, procurement, according to the World Bank, public procurement is a necessary strategic development instrument to promote good governance and to embed the effective and efficient use of public resources, which ultimately results in high levels of service delivery. Given the ever increased focus on sustainable development, the role and focus of public procurement has evolved from a predominantly technical and administrative process to a series of processes that built around efficiency, transparency, and accountability in using public resources. And in pursuit of better developmental outcomes and economic growth, sound procurement and management of contracts is quite essential. During a moment of crisis, reliance on procurement may increase in order to meet or respond to unexpected needs. As we all know, this was the case last year when the country went to lockdown due to the coronavirus pandemic. And in order to meet the envisaged need for personal protective equipment and other resources to prepare the public sector to deal with the virus, National Treasury issued an Instruction 8 note, which relaxed public procurement measures in order to deal with the state of disaster. This measure was to speed up procurement of goods and commodities required to reduce and control the spread of the virus. But unfortunately, this urgency was met with optimism, which resulted in rather opportunism, and well, maybe optimism as well, but mostly opportunism, which resulted in President Ramaphosa tasking the Special Investigations Unit with investigating irregular expenditure on COVID-19 procurement practices. This arranged and included procurement of and provision of contracts for PPE, for construction funds, for food parcel delivery, ventilators, and disinfecting equipment. And according to the SIU briefing to Parliament last year in August, more than 5 billion rand in questionable COVID-19 tenders were being investigated. Based on the importance of procurement practices in the provision of services to the public sector and the delivery of socio-economic rights, Parliament has an obligation to ensure that the National Treasury and the Office of the Chief Procurement Officer make procurement and spending information publicly available. And just lastly, pertaining to the process of the draft procurement bill, which our colleagues at ASA also referred to, we would like to encourage the committee to urge Treasury and the Office of the Chief Procurement Officer to communicate about progress in addition to the broader reform questions. And that will be the end of my presentation. So thank you very much, Chair and fellow colleagues.
Ms. Taylor, you were right on time. Thank you very much.
Fantastic, thanks, Chair.
Okay, then can we go to Kosatu Matthew? I'm still on the platform.
Yes, no, I'm here, Comrade Chair.
Please.
Cool. Let me just try to share my little presentation quickly. Okay. Hopefully you can see it, Comrade Chair.
Yes, you can.
Okay. And I'll be your first witness, Comrade Chair. If anybody says you are not at Parliament today, I'll be your first witness in defense.
On a point of order, Chairperson.
Yes, who's that?
Chairperson.
Yes, take a point of order.
Chairperson, can we kindly request that Kosatu remove the flag of the ANC at their background? It is unparliamentary to put party symbols in Parliament.
Honorable member, that, as far as I know, that applies to us as members of Parliament, not members of public.
Yeah.
Members of the public, they represent their own things. So when they come, we never stop them. Okay. Continue, Matthew.
Yeah, no, my apologies, Comrade Chair, if I offended the member. I think in this virtual reality, I'm sitting at home. So this is not for propaganda purposes, but something that my mother made for me many years ago. But no, thanks, Comrade Chair. Look, I think, yeah, let me just cut to the presentation to thank the members in the committee for giving us space as COSATU just to raise our views, proposals, and concerns around the Appropriations Bill. I think, Comrade Chair, where we kind of differ with government and Treasury on the Appropriations Bill and the budget at large, I think is the premise from where we start. We feel that the bill essentially is an austerity bill, and we had really hoped to see more of a stimulus one, especially towards recapacitating the state and government, especially to invest in public services, which are essential. Chair, as we all know, we are in the deepest economic recession in a century. Unemployment is pushed past 40%. And we think we need to balance managing the recession, getting out of it, trying to save and create jobs, as well as managing the debt trajectory to a more sustainable and less dangerous level. We are concerned about the consequence of simply prioritizing tackling the debt, which must be dealt with, versus not enough attention and stimulus given to growing the economy. Chair, for us, the number one solution to our problems is to save and create jobs in companies and to grow the economy. If you can do that, then you can give space to the state to deal with the deficit and the debt, etc. But having said that, Comrade Chair, we need to address the fundamental causes of the fiscal crisis, which is the leaks in the state, the billions lost to corruption, wasteful expenditure, distressed state-owned enterprises requiring constant bailouts, and of course, what the damage done to SARS previously. We think we need to have a sustainable approach to debt reduction, not just simply an over-exaggerated focus on it at the expense of other priorities. Chair, for us, the real cause of the fiscal crisis is that we lose up to 10% of the budget at all levels of government to corruption, to wasteful expenditure, fruitless expenditure, etc. Of course, the impact upon SARS, where billions have been lost to tax and customs evasion and fraud. And of course, our SOEs have required huge amounts of bailouts. And Chair, you cannot expect taxes to increase or SARS to meet its tax targets if the economy is stagnant, if we're having declining tax revenues from company tax, from income tax, VAT, etc. And for us, the Appropriations Bill is silent on all of these fundamental causes of the fiscal crisis. We just simply see a very unhelpful and, to be honest, a lazy fixation on the wage bill. So in essence, we feel as COSATU and workers across that we're simply outsourcing the bill for corruption to workers. But Chair, having said that, we do agree with government that we need to manage the debt trajectory. We cannot afford to go the route of Greece or Ireland, where we allow debt to get so out of hand, it undermines the very sovereignty of the state and the society at large. Chair, for us, proposals COSATU on measures which can be used to tackle corruption are a fair amount. We know not all of them will be popular with politicians, and that's fine. I think number one, Chair, is that we need to have leaders who lead by example. So you have an existing prohibition in the state for public servants and members of cabinet, etc., from doing business with the state. We feel that needs to be extended to other politically exposed persons. For example, national and provincial leaders of ruling parties, their spouses and their children from state tenders. It doesn't mean we're banning them from doing business, but simply from doing business with the state whilst their relatives, their immediate relatives, are leaders of government, etc. So we think we either need to establish anti-corruption courts or to seriously capacitate the commercial crimes courts, but we can't afford to have these endless delays to corruption trials lasting years and years. Chair, the Fifth Parliament passed a very progressive Amendment Act to the Auditing Act, but we've only seen one official being held liable under it, and it gives significant powers for the state to personally hold offending politicians and management and officials personally financially liable for corruption, wasteful expenditure. That can be a powerful tool to build a new culture in the state. We think there are some beginning signs of government trying to tackle compromised politicians and management, but we think it needs to be much more intensive and systematic across the state and departments. There are positive signs I think we must appreciate in SARS about recapacitating it. I think in the bill, there's an additional provision for additional financial resources to SARS to hire additional skilled workers, etc. I think that's positive, but we need to see SARS do much more on customs enforcement, where currently only 5% of goods coming through our ports of entry are inspected for customs duty, and that threatens local manufacturing capacity, jobs, etc. We would want to see an open online procurement system for the entire state. Currently, we have a myriad of systems, and these are really leakages for corruption. And equally, Treasury needs to table quickly at NEDLAC and then Parliament the public procurement bill, which has been sitting in the pipeline for quite a long time, several years. Chair, we also do feel there is a need for centralized public procurement of certain large-scale items like textbooks, medical supplies, etc., government vehicles, and so forth, because you can affect savings in, and you can help to direct it towards local procurement. On the wage bill, Comrade Chair, not just in the public service, but public sector entities, municipalities, I think our number one principle is for government to respect collective bargaining. Wages should be engaged with at the bargaining units and find compromise and solutions with those workers there. Chair, I think we've seen a lot of, to be honest, propaganda being thrown in this debate, simply seeking to blame workers for wanting to earn a living wage. But in fact, the wage bill has been stable at 35% of the budget since 2009. What we've seen actually is the headcount per population ratio plummeting over the last 27 years. And we're seeing the impact of freezing of posts in critical frontline service delivery departments like education, health, and policing on their ability to deliver quality public services. When we impose a 4-year wage freeze, we must expect a brain drain of skilled public servants. Doctors and nurses will move overseas to better paying jobs. Teachers will move to the private schools, which are less stressful, pay better, etc. And that's going to further weaken the state's capacity. We don't think it's fair, Comrade Chair, to compare public and private sector wages. In the private sector, you have cashiers at retail shops making 60,000 Rand a year. You have waitresses earning barely a minimum wage. You have farm workers, domestic workers. Public sector, you have 20,000 doctors, 100,000 nurses, 350,000 teachers. So these are largely skilled professions. So we'd rather compare apples to apples. But at the same time, Chair, it's quite worrying that in the division of revenue bill, there was a proposed increase in allocation for councillors. So government needs to lead from the front and not simply give the bill to public servants. Chair, we think government must engage in good faith at the bargaining units. We are hopeful we can find an agreement. We think the recent discussions give us some hope that we can find that win-win solution, because we don't want to see the state going under, but we need to see public servants being protected from inflation and to see government respecting collective bargaining. But Chair, we think there are additional measures where government can help set the right political tone, that we can reduce the packages of political office bearers in cabinet, provincial cabinets, mayoral committees by 25%. We should be looking at scrapping former MPs' severance packages, free flights, etc., including the ministerial handbook, overseas trips, travel allowances, etc. These might be a small drop in the broader ocean of the budget, but it sends the correct political message if you want a nurse earning 186,000 Rand a year to tighten her belt. Chair, there is a need to reduce what management earns across the state. Often the salary levels of management is too high, but also we need to put in place salary caps on what management can earn in the entities, the SOEs, because there you will find at SABC, 8 managers earning more than the president. It doesn't make sense. At Eskom, you have 800 managers earning more than 2 million Rand a year. We think if you do those things, you can protect the lower middle income public servants from inflation. And we should also be encouraging the GPF to give home loans for struggling public servants falling through the cracks. Chair, elements of concern on the Appropriations bill is that it doesn't speak to the Auditor General's damning reports on all these departments and entities. We've seen very few politicians or management or other officials being held to account for the massive levels of corruption, wasteful expenditure. We don't see any new provisions in the bill to address these problems, especially in particular corruption, wasteful expenditure. Chair, the President tabled the Economic Reconstruction Recovery Plan at Parliament in October last year, but the bill is largely silent on the commitments in it. It's very silent on the issue of job creation, infrastructure investment, economic reforms, fighting crime and corruption, or rebuilding the state. In fact, it doesn't say much on any of these except for infrastructure. Yet even around infrastructure, Comrade Chair, the funding has been significantly reduced. Chair, I think we must welcome and appreciate as COSATU some of the increases in the appropriations bill. I think in particular SARS, which is a win-win thing because it's going to generate additional revenues for the state and help to tackle tax and customs fraud. I think, Chair, we must also appreciate the additional posts being given to early childhood education, which is having a positive impact on schooling. Some of the additional funding also for school sanitation, the health facility revitalization, NHI grants, and electrification investments. I think those are positive and they will hopefully yield positive fruits. Chair, I think we must appreciate there is a need to shift funds, given the pandemic, given the recession, given the need to give support to the most needy. But I think one worrying part, Chair, in the bill is that there's a virtual absence of analysis about what is the possible negative impacts of some of these expenditure cuts, especially around infrastructure. Chair, I think we all know, and members will know much better than all of us, the continuous problems of underspending in departments. But again, the bill doesn't seek to say what remedies are going to be put in place to address the underspending, because it robs other departments which could have spent the money and which would have had a positive impact upon the poor, the economy, etc. Chair, I think, again, members have raised this many times, the need for departments to pay suppliers and SMEs within 30 days. Yet frequently this is not happening. We've seen in Gauteng a backlog of about 2 billion rand. Again, the bill is silent, but the consequence, Comrade Chair, of this is that companies close, workers are retrenched, or they're just simply left to go home unpaid. Chair, I think we must appreciate the 350 COVID-19 grant. We think the government did well to implement that from last year. I think we appreciated when the president extended it until April this year. But Chair, we think at 2 billion rand a month, it is easily affordable, especially in a budget of almost 1.7 trillion rand. If you look at any of the post offices where you see queues for hours at a time of people desperate to get this small amount of money, it shows you the impact it's having. It's often the only source of income for these people. It's not much, it has many issues, many problems. But in essence, Chair, almost all political parties have expressed support for a basic income grant. This is the BIG in essence. We think, Chair, we need to extend it beyond April. We understand that the Department of Social Development has motivated for its extension. We think it'll be helpful if Parliament also raises flag in support of that. Let's extend it for the duration of this year. At 2 billion rand a month, it's quite affordable. But Chair, there's no point of having a BIG when times are well and good. You'd rather have it when times are tough, and then you see over a longer term, do you sustain it or what do you do? But right now is when the deepest recession of 100 years, this is when it's most critical. I think, Chair, we must also raise our concerns about over the below inflation cuts to social grants. Again, it doesn't make sense. If you needed to cut somewhere, you can cut somewhere, but not upon these small little grants which really help the most indigent households. Chair, just in some of the specific departments in the economic cluster, we're quite worried about the continuous cuts to DTI, specifically to its industrial financing impact, because this has a massive impact upon the manufacturing, the clothing sector significantly. It has a direct impact upon the amount of jobs that can be saved or created. Chair, we must also raise deep concerns about the cuts to the CCMA. The cuts of 300 million rand to the CCMA has meant that it has had to retrench about 40% of its commissioners. It has had to cancel its conciliation services. It's had to reduce many of its support to workers. This is the same time when 2.2 million workers lost their jobs last year. Millions more lost their wages and other benefits. Millions were exposed to dangerous working conditions. And at the same time, when they go to CCMA for relief, it's been devastated. So we think that needs to be reversed, Comrade Chair. And 300 million rand in the budget is a drop in the ocean. But to the CCMA, it can collapse it. We think, Chair, we need to look at significantly giving more resources to tourism department, because that is one of our largest employers at almost 1 million workers. But the amount of money given to it is so little, it has almost no impact upon the industry. Similarly, Chair, we're concerned about sports and culture, where the relief is often not reaching the artists or sports sectors who desperately need it. Chair, there's a lack of plans around the SOEs. I think we must appreciate some of the efforts taking place at Eskom now to reduce the debt levels. Those are very positive. I think some of the efforts to recover stolen money, including from multinational companies, is positive, but we need to see more being done. And we need to see the NPA and the law enforcement coming to the party and assisting Eskom to arrest those persons, to confiscate the assets and to bring them to court. Chair, SABC, the silence of government is deafening on it. There's a jobs bloodbath there, and we have no turnaround plan. All we see is workers being retrenched, and SABC not even honoring those retrenchment packages afterwards. We have seen during this past year the literal collapse of PRASA, no government plan to turn it around. We are hopeful that SAA there will be a turnaround plan which can ensure a new airline, which will be set on a sustainable footing, but we can't afford what has happened in the past, where 1,000 workers have paid the price with job losses. Again, Chair, the issue of Denel, it's a horror story. Workers have simply been left unpaid for months at a time, and they're told if they get 10% of their salary, they must count themselves very lucky. And again, we're not seeing a plan to save Denel. We are equally quite concerned, Comrade Chair, given the strategic importance of Transnet, about what is the plan to fix the ports and freight rail. Chair, I think we must welcome in basic education the investments in 1,000 schools to address the infrastructure backlog. But I think the bill, Chair, is largely silent on when will government finally eradicate the mud schools, the sanitation, the infrastructure backlogs. And Chair, I think we all know this has been a goal which has been repeatedly kicked down the road for more than 17 years. Chair, just getting towards the end, on the social cluster, I think we've all seen the crisis facing NSFAS. We've seen the failure to address the free funding for CPI continuously. And we think there should have been an effort in the special appropriations bill that we'll discuss on Friday about giving additional funding to NSFAS, given its importance to poor families. We are, though, concerned, Comrade Chair, about health, about the cutting of human resource funding and the impact of freezing the post on its capacity to fight the pandemic. And Chair, again, everybody loves to complain about Home Affairs, but it's difficult to blame Home Affairs when the budget is being cut and there's a freeze on post. We expect them to deliver at the same time. Chair, I think we must raise concern on the issue of Department of Water Sanitation and the significant impact of neglect in maintenance and water conservation. And whilst Cape Town, we saw that a few years ago, we're now seeing it in Nelson Mandela Bay and other parts of the Eastern Cape. We had really hoped to see more from Public Works about what are they doing to clean up the corrupt letting contracts. And again, we're seeing the consequence of the lack of maintenance in key state facilities, from police stations to Home Affairs, hospitals and schools. Chair, in the security cluster, I think we're quite concerned about the de facto cutting of SAP's headcount by 7,000, despite a SONA commitment last year not to do that, in fact, to do the opposite. We're worried about the cuts to correctional services, and somehow we expect the officials there to prevent those prisons from becoming COVID-19 hotspots. I think we've all seen the repeated allegations of significant corruption in the State Security Agency, yet we've seen very little accountability in that regard. Similarly with the Defense Force. And I think also with DIRCO, we see very little efforts to reduce luxury expenditure there. So in conclusion, Comrade Chair, I hope I've kept to the time. I think our fundamental concern as COSATU is that the budget and the appropriations bill doesn't address the key challenges facing our country, which is a stagnant economy, the pandemic of corruption, wasteful expenditure, collapse of municipalities, entities, SOEs and departments, and of course, significant tax and customs evasions. I think for us, Chair, those are the things which we fundamentally must address if we're to address the fiscal crisis facing the state and ensure it's rebuilt and that we are able to tackle corruption and crime, alleviate poverty, and to help grow the economy and create jobs. So I think that's our presentation in a nutshell, Comrade Chair. I hope I've kept to the time frame. Thanks, Comrade Chair.
Thank you. Yes, you did, Comrade Matthew. That takes us to the end of our presentations. Am I right?
Yes, Chairperson. That's correct.
What happened to the chairperson? is happening. I know this meeting. Colleagues, am I audible?
Yes, you are, Honorable Peters.
Yes, the chairperson is just disconnected and he has asked me to facilitate this part up until he is reconnected. So I'm just going to take the members who would want to speak. I'll check on the chat, on the group participants list. There's no one so far. Can I get indications from you, comrades and honorable members? Any takers?
Standing chair, yes, Honorable Sonyana here.
Honorable Sonyana. Anyone? Anybody on the platform? Okay, Honorable Sonyana, you may go on whilst we're looking for others to participate.
Thank you very much, Acting Chairperson. Acting Chair, I don't have many questions per se. I just have a comment. First and foremost, we'd like to thank all the organizations that have came here today. We appreciate the presentation which they have given us. They've enlightened us in so many ways. To the Center for Child Law, to Ms. Catherine Hall. Catherine, we feel your pain. The pain that you feel is the pain that we feel. Our children are very important, and 13 million children to be affected, it's a serious problem because we need them to get as much nutrition as possible, and we need them to grow up to become responsible citizens of this country. But if us as the state, we cannot take care of our own children, it's a serious problem. Yes, we hear you about the 1 billion, which is needed. And we are hoping that the government of the day have heard what the presentation which you've given, and that they can make ways to make sure that our children are taken care of. And then to Matt Johnson from Outer, thank you very much, Matt, for the presentation given today. I just want to understand from you, Matt, you have spoken about the Special Appropriations Bill participation, public participation. And then you said that it must be halted. You advise that it should be done at the beginning of the budget process. Can you maybe explain further to us how will this benefit the process? And then on the issue of the bloated cabinet, yes, we agree with you as the EFF. We have said it before, and we're going to say it again. The cabinet of the Republic of South Africa, it is bloated. There's just too many cadres being given ministers and deputy ministers. You know, we've said it before that there's no need for deputy ministers. And we've said it that we can actually make it way smaller than what is happening right now. And then on the Public Service Accountability Monitor, thank you very much, Andy Letele, for the presentation. We've heard you. I just have, you've spoken about inclusive public participation in the budget process. You've said that this was very critical. And yes, we agree with you on that one. I just want to ask you, Andile, on when you spoke about irregular expenditure and the current government, you know, when you spoke about irregular expenditure, the current government, you know, irregular expenditure and the current government is like cat and milk. It's like bread and butter. You can't separate the two. What advice would you give us as opposition parties who must always constantly make the government to account on what else must we do to make sure that we hold them accountable? Thank you very much, Acting Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Sonyane, and I can see the chairperson is back. Chairperson, maybe I must take this opportunity to raise the issues I would have raised, and because there was no one after Honorable Tloyane. I also want to join Honorable Tloyane in thanking the presenters of today from Center for Child Law, the PSAM, AUTA, and COSATU. And I think the other thing that I just need to raise, Chairperson, other than COSATU, most of the presenters, your presentations were not numbered, so it was a bit difficult to make notes along the line about what particular a slide one would want to raise issues with regard to. But I want to thank you all for your presentations. And like Honorable Tlongwane, I think the one presentation that always touches us deeply is the presentations that are related to the conditions and the standard of living of our children. And if you have to project into the future, then you get worried what type of children we would be having. I'm happy to hear the Center for Child Law indicate that they do engage and participate in the public engagement processes of the Portfolio Committee on Social Development. And it would also be important for me to know whether the Center for Child Law, in your research, do you cover the entire country, or do you only focus on where the institutions that you operate from are under, like your University of Pretoria and your University of Cape Town? So is it Gauteng and the Western Cape only? Catherine would probably talk to that. But also, the one thing that gets me worried is the more we hear and the more we get inputs about the need to increase the child support grant, the more you find our children roaming the streets. I just don't know what can be done to the parents to hold them responsible, hold them accountable for their children, because one of the things that we don't seem to focus on is the issue of the responsibility of parents as well as the responsibility of families over the children. Because before even the state and government through the Department of Social Development or health can come, and basic education can come into the picture, there is a parent, there is a family. So it is important that there must be some kind of emphasis placed on the role of families. One would want to know what is the state of families and households in South Africa as we speak, because to see children roaming the streets during schooling time and also seeing children roaming the street, knowing that this child is qualified and is getting a grant. And there are processes also at times, and we have seen through different TV programs, children who are neglected despite them being beneficiaries of child support grant. And also the tendency in society of people wanting to cash in on the fact that the child support grant seems to be more than the, not the child support, the foster care grant seems to be more than the child support grant. So there is a tendency, and I don't know whether the Center for Child Law can help with that type of information on the incidents that was picked up in Limpopo and other parts of the country, where people literally borrow children to go and apply for grants. And I think for me, that is one of the things that will actually work against the objective for which you are motivating for today here. And also under your solutions, I didn't hear you suggest where the money or the budget should come from to top up the grants as you are recommending. And I think, Chairperson, you would remember that the mobi.com, is it mobi.com? Yeah, that agency that is also doing a research on child support grants. I would want to know whether there is any relationship or working together between all these agencies that are focusing on child research so that we can then be able to look at a comprehensive package of their inputs. I also want to take this opportunity to thank OUTA. I'm not going to raise all the presenters. I just want to know from OUTA, and thank you for your presentations, and thank you for your indications that you did a study on the relevance and the role, that is my own emphasis, of the PCOs and the existence thereof, because it would be very important for the speaker also to know that is parties really utilizing the resources that they are being given for MPs to have a presence in the communities, to be able to service the communities, because it is important that we know that. But is OUTA also getting an opportunity to make some of these presentations to municipalities as well as to provinces? Because I do note that some of your indications are related to audit outcomes of municipalities and also some of the issues for provinces. And provinces need to have a direct link and oversight over municipalities. So it would be important for us to know if there is any engagements that OUTA has with provinces and municipalities, because I believe that your information is valuable for their planning and projections. But also with regard, and your consistency with regard to the fuel levy for major road infrastructure. How much does OUTA suggest the fuel levy to be raised to cover the challenges faced by the 750,000 kilometers of a road network, with only about 30% of those being in good conditions, and those are under Sunrun, which is the national network. And if you look at the provincial roads, you look at the municipal roads in particular, because at times we are unable to differentiate the streets and municipal roads as well as the regional or the provincial roads, and club all of them together. And I heard the Minister of Transport speaking about it now the other day about those potholes in the municipal areas not being his particular responsibility. But I would believe that as a country, we've got a responsibility to making sure that the norms and standards for our roads, be it municipal, be it provincial and national roads, should be that we can be very proud of. But if the fuel levy should be settled with the funding of the road infrastructure, how much should the quantum be? Because I would believe that the motorists will be reeling under the overtaxation on the fuel levy. I understand your concerns and consistencies about the road accident fund, which I believe there is now an effort to really address the challenges that are being faced by the road accident fund. And I think we need to give the board and the new CEO an opportunity to also probably come to the committee to inform us on what they are doing. But I think that there is light at the end of the tunnel, maybe because of the experience that I've had in being in that particular space. But I want to know, how much does OUTA say the fuel levy should be increased to? And would ordinary South Africans who have got chorkies be able to afford this fuel levy? Because I would believe that it is just going to be unaffordable. And the issue that I'm not going to raise anything from PSAM, COSATU, I fully support COSATU with regard to the presentation that they made, especially with the view that the government employee pension fund be used to help struggling public servants to be able to have, struggling public servants who necessarily are contributing to GPF are in huge debts. Some of them don't even qualify to get loans to build homes or to even have a site. You find public servants living in squalor, living in shacks, only to die, and their beneficiaries then get the benefit of this. And if there is a particular percentage COSATU is suggesting that can be utilized for by GPF to support the struggling public servants to have to become homeowners, that will be a very important. And also, COSATU, how do you suggest the government should fund? I heard you speak about the SRD, but how do you suggest government should fund the BIG? I think the debate about the need for the BIG it's actually getting into fertile ground, but the issues, especially taking into consideration the budget cuts that had to be experienced this financial year, where does COSATU suggest the BIG could be funded from, and what would be the guidelines that you give, other than the fact that the person is unemployed? And with regard to the temporary intervention of the SRD, you say the SRD should be extended. Equally, my question, I'm sorry, if it is extended, how do you suggest it to be funded? And I know that there was one presenter from the previous public hearings that said you can tax the rich, but I would believe that equally the motivation that SARS needs to be capacitated and supported to be able to collect more revenue. You are going to be able to tax the rich up to a particular threshold, but beyond that, then it becomes those very rich becomes a burden to the state, because they have to qualify for certain tax breaks and all those others, so as to be able to make it possible that they can become consistent contributors to the revenue fund. So if we can be helped to understand that, Chairperson, I think it will be very helpful. But thank you very much for the presenters to this public hearing. It is really appreciated and eye-opening. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Hlanyana. Thank you, Honorable Peters, for holding the fort. Technology just does its thing. Honorable members, can I get an indication? Is there somebody who, honorable member, who would like to come in? I know Honorable Matafa is quite challenged with his voice. Is also there. Any other honorable member before I come in? Okay, are you? If you are there, you'll come in. Let me start with my questions. But before getting to my questions, let me thank Children's Institute and Center for Child Law, Organization Undoing Tax Abuse, Public Service Accountability Monitor, and COSATU for taking time to talk to the committee and raise issues which are not just their issues, but are issues which concern the wider public. Thank you so much. Perhaps now that we are having Ms. Hall as the first presenter, I think what she has just presented, I think, was the scenes which we saw in Hluhluwe in KZN, where a granny stays with a lot of children and who go out, and I can tell you that that distance is more than 100 kilometers to where they sell their brooms. I think it was a story which was covered on TV. Young kids who are supposed to be at school. It just summarizes the plight of some of these children that they find themselves in. And I think one should also congratulate the KZN KwaZulu-Natal government for responding to that disaster. I saw MEC Jomo Sbia and other departments sent by the Premier there to go and attend to that. But it just shows that there is there is a big challenge out there as far as our children are concerned. But the question which I asked myself was, is somebody not getting money for those kids? Because what happens for those of us who come from rural areas, you'll have a parent being somewhere in an urban area, getting all the money and leaving the kids with the grannies. I think it's one area when we are dealing with the issue that because mothers, they know that they must go and get grants for these kids, but most of them will find that they don't reside with their children. I think these are the things that we should persist with as government and as the community in general, because in my head, I think somebody's getting money for those kids that we saw. My question to Catherine, I just want to check one, each of the grants that
Switch off your camera, Chair. Hello, honorable members. The chairperson is frozen on the screen. Can we continue? Is there any responses whilst the chairperson is trying to get back? Darren, this is sabotage.
Yes, madam. Hello, madam.
I don't know what's happening. You are quiet and the members are also quiet. And I can see many members. I was asking whether the presenters can respond. Catherine, Matt, and
Sure.
and Outer.
The hands are up, Chair. Yes,
Oh,
Matthew
okay.
Parks and Zuki Swakota indicated that they.
Okay, let me allow Zuki Swakota to say, to speak.
Thank
Zuki
you. Thank you.
Swakota.
Honorable. Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes.
Are you happy for me to stay off camera for the line, or should I have my video on? I'm happy either way.
You can have it off because I think we all have problems today.
Okay. Thank you. Just as my colleague Andile had indicated, she and I are sharing question time. So I'll be taking, I think, the one question that came through for us. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And also, yeah, we've been quite encouraged by the engagement and inputs from our fellow members of the public giving input. So that's, yeah, really glad to be here. On the request or the question from Honorable Hlonyana, I think it's an important question that she asks around the role of members of parliament in particular in relation to recommendations on irregular expenditure. And part of our submission, our written submission, outlines some of the areas that we find are particularly problematic and propose some solutions. I think what's really encouraging is the amount of work that the Auditor General's Office does do on a regular basis to outline things like the poor internal controls that often result in irregular expenditure. And so this is already work that is done, that is available for committees in most instances. And we would really say that harnessing and leveraging the findings, audit findings by AGSA, by the Auditor General's Office is really important. The second aspect, in terms of ways in which committees can be, can take this work forward, is that the high levels of tolerance, for non-compliance in provinces that have been outlined year after year, in provinces like ours that we're in, that's one area in which committees can actually call accounting officers to account. When at the provincial level in particular, when accounting officers should be presenting to Parliament these questions, or to the legislatures, these are questions that committees on appropriation and so on should really be hammering hard, and based on the very important findings from audits by the Auditor General. Lastly, perhaps two last points, is that monitoring and oversight of departmental procurement. And again, this is an area we looked at in our submission, looking at particularly some of the findings by the SIU. The monitoring and oversight for us is another area of concern. And in fact, has also been outlined by the SIU, by AXA, and in particular in relation to the COVID-19 context, but beyond that. And so much of the work here, we would say, for committees can be to hold procurement officers and those responsible for supply chain failures within departments and across provinces, holding them to account in this regard as well. Procurement is such a fundamental area, whether we're looking at education, health, and otherwise. So this for us is a really important area, and an area that committees can directly be engaging. And of course, facilitate the work that the Auditor General has been doing to date to create a much greater awareness about the importance of oversight and auditing and audit terminology, which I think also empowers many within contexts. And I think this is another area that, within constituency spaces and opportunities, that MPs can play a role by simply creating that awareness and helping with that awareness. The findings of the AG in relation to the COVID-19 procurement, for instance, and the role of civil society and members of the public, just regular members of the public, giving input on what's happening on the ground. That's another area that we feel, whether it's during constituency periods or in the regular work of committees in the context of education and engaging with their constituents, that's another space of leveraging and harnessing the work that's already underway and happens routinely through the Auditor General's office. So we really appreciate that question, and I think I will stop there just to avoid going on forever, but I think the preventative aspect, preventative controls are important as well. And here too, perhaps when committees seek to have the executive and accounting officers reporting to them, asking what preventative measures are in place to in fact just avoid irregular expenditure and other non-compliance is also a really important opportunity. Thank you very much, and thank you as well for the other observations.
Okay, thank you, Zukiswa Kota. And the next respondent.
I could come in here. It's Catherine Hall. Should I keep my video off for the bandwidth?
Yes.
Okay.
I think we have seen your face in the beginning.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. Thanks very much for the questions. I'll try to address them quickly. Honourable Hlonyana, thank you so much. It's great to feel heard in Parliament, and all of these issues are painful, from children to railways that don't work. There's a lot of pain in the country. We also hope that this information gets back to Treasury. We do engage regularly with government, with the Department of Social Development and SASSA and Treasury. Sometimes it's very difficult to convince Treasury. It can be difficult for the DSD to convince Treasury of some things. In effect, Treasury is in a position of power where it can at times steamroller departments and make policy. And so we are, it's great that we could come to this committee, but we also are unsure about how the process works from here. We are effectively, we presume that although we understand in terms of the Constitution, Parliament does have authority to amend the budget. It's not too late to do so because the Division of Revenue Bill has already been passed and departments are already expending the budgets. So, all we can think about is the October budget policy statement if we're wanting to push for changes or additional budget within the current year. So what would perhaps be useful, and as I said, we're not very familiar with this committee, but is it, would it be that this committee meets and holds public hearings in July ahead of the budget and brings Treasury into those public hearings so that this Parliament can exercise its oversight role and ask Treasury to explain the decisions that it makes, or how, so this is in a way a question back to the committee about how we can continue to engage through this committee and how the process could work so that we can, in fact, have an opportunity to influence the budget process. Honourable Peters, you had a number of questions. Briefly, yeah, we the Children's Institute, and our research is all national. Our work focuses almost exclusively on policies and programs with national scope, and it's the same with the Centre for Child Law. They work nationally and they take on cases that have national and systemic impact. And both of us work very closely with, collaborative civil society groups across the country. Our research often draws on the work of Stats SA, which it was also, this is an important point that was raised in one of the, in the outer presentation, I think, about the reduced funding for Stats SA, which is such an important source of information, which enables us to track the situation of households across the country. So yeah, that national resource is really important for us in our work. I hear your concerns about children in the streets. And yes, these are concerns, although we have 20 million children in the country. We have very high attendance rates in the country. It's lower for younger children because early childhood centres are not always available and not affordable and not adequately funded. So this was another issue that we have been raising in other forums. But perhaps the important thing when you talk about the need to support families who are struggling to care for children is precisely this issue that we brought up about the decimation of the welfare services in this country. Social workers need to be in the community, on the ground. They should not be sitting at desks in offices pushing paper around and chasing foster care backlogs. And the solution that we described is the comprehensive legal solution, which is specifically designed to address that problem. The question of where the budget should come from, well, firstly, we just want to reiterate that in this small, narrow presentation of ours, we're not asking for more money. We're just asking to correct the fact that we went backwards. The state has effectively taken money away from orphan children by reducing the foster child grant budget and has allocated the savings to a non-child item. So we often find that we organizations who are working to achieve social justice, which is the same justice that is at the core of our constitution, when we make these points, we are asked where the budget should come from. If Treasury had been asked where it was going to get the budget to bail out SAA, it would have responded that it's taking that from social grants that are meant to go to poor people and orphaned children. And that might not have been then approved by Parliament. In this instance, we are not asking for additional budget. We're simply asking for the replacement of the budget that was already there and that was taken away for some other item. The chair, Honourable Chair, Buthelezi, I think you were referring to a case that was in the news recently in Tlhului in KZN, where children were found having to travel long distances to sell brooms in order to support themselves. Yes, these individual cases come out and they are examples of the systemic problems that we face, which is extremely high rates of poverty. We know that this is the case. We know that families, even those who do receive child support grants, struggle enormously to be able to provide for children. And this is in part because the child support grants are too small, as I've mentioned, and also because there is this missing area where we have large numbers of unemployed people who are caregivers, but they are not able to access any social assistance for themselves. And that's the other big policy question about comprehensive social protection. I'm sorry that I missed the chair's last question. There was, it sort of froze at that point, so I'll leave it there.
Thank you. The chairperson is back on the platform. Chairperson, can you take over?
Yes, let's thank you, Honorable Peters. I don't know what this thing is doing to me today. Can I allow who's the next respondent? I think I'll come in the second round of questions. Who want to respond to the questions which have been raised by the honorable members?
Thanks, Chair. I think Matthew would be last in the original order.
Yes.
So thank you to all the members for the questions. I'm keeping my video off to make it better. Honorable Glonyana, thank you very much for your question, and thank you for your comments. And when you say, you didn't say it to me, but you said you hope that government is listening. We really do expect that it is, because of course the majority of this committee is consisted of members of the ruling party. So on the special appropriations bill, I'm sorry, I think I misspoke. So let me just clarify that. When you asked why it should happen earlier, and I think I caused some confusion about the public hearing. I simply said I don't want to go into detail about that, knowing that the public hearing on that is coming, I think on Friday, and I don't want to speak on behalf of my colleague who will, I think, be presenting there. We've made a separate submission on that. But let me comment on the question anyway, because I think it's an important one. It alludes to what the previous speaker also said about the timing of this hearing and whether this hearing actually has any impact on the budget at all. And, you know, from more experienced members of the ruling party in particular, for example, the previous chair of the Standing Committee on Finance, we always get the response to say, you know, don't complain about the process. It is what it is. And you can just accept that and be grateful. But we don't. And I think if this process were to happen earlier, or a similar process were to happen earlier, where we could actually proactively, before, not retrospectively, but proactively comment on what National Treasury intends to table as the appropriations bill in the following year, we could influence that. And I think as a member of an opposition party, I appreciate the question very much, because yes, I think we are in a similar position, civil society and opposition parties, in that, you know, we're trying to persuade the ruling party to change its mind about certain things. But for that to happen, the ruling party must be susceptible to change. It must be susceptible to listening to public voices that may differ from its own decision-making. And of course, it would be much more useful if that were to happen while the decisions are being made, not after the fact. On the bloated cabinet, thank you very much, Honourable Member. I take the point that the EFF has also been pushing for this. And so, I mean, this is going to illustrate my point. If civil society is saying this is something that should happen, if the president, the sitting president, committed that this is something that will happen, and opposition parties are saying that this is something that should happen, surely this committee can take the resolution here and now in its report and make a recommendation that this needs to be something that needs to be raised to the top of Cabinet's priority list. And even though many people may be frustrated about such a decision to consolidate Cabinet, that unpopular decisions need to be taken. And that's something that can happen very quickly, I believe, if there's political will to do so. Honourable Peters, thank you for the questions. I will make a point of numbering the slides in the future. My apologies for that. On the constituency office issues, yes, thank you for picking that up. It is something that we haven't noticed anyone else pick up. And we understand there's a certain aggregate number. There's a certain amount of money coming from the fiscus through Parliament, flowing into political parties directly, that are supposed to be funding these constituency offices. And these are supposed to be this bridge between communities and Parliament. And it seems like the Joint Standing Committee on the Financial Management of Parliament, their reports suggest that there is no real measurement of the performance of those offices. And they've also suggested that some of these offices don't really seem to exist, but the money is continuously allocated. And this is an important principle I was trying to bring across in the presentation. And it's something that we will take further, but I thought it would be useful for this committee to pick it up as well, because yes, of course, it's part of the Appropriations Bill vote too. And if this committee saw fit, which I very much hope it will, it can make the recommendation that the financial records of constituency officers per political party are made public, so that those officers and your political parties, honorable members, can be held accountable for that money. Whether we're having opportunities to engage with provinces and municipalities, I think I should say yes, there have been exceptional cases of that happening, but in general, no. We would very much like to do that. And I think the Public Service Accountability Monitor also made it very clear in a very simple way how that can benefit, and how that would maybe instill some confidence in the public that government is listening and that it is willing to change the way it spends money in response to people's priorities in everyday life. And we're seeing in this appropriations bill that that's not happening, and that's a serious issue. So we will continuously try and engage with the provinces and with municipalities, but I do think that Parliament and this committee needs to take some responsibility in terms of its oversight function, that it can also call provinces and individual municipalities to come and account and ask COCTA, what are they doing to really alleviate the situation with Eskom debt, for example. And then the final question, I think, was about the fuel levy. And Honorable Peters, I want to put it exactly as you put it. You asked how much should fuel levy be increased to service the entire road network. And that's, I'm sorry, but I must have misspoke. That's not at all what I'm suggesting. I want to be clear about the road accident fund, and I'm quite shocked by the response. Honorable Peters, you've said that the Minister of Transport, for example, says that municipal potholes are not really his problem. And I think that's a problem in general, where there's not enough intergovernmental fiscal relations that are really constructive, that there's communication and a comprehensive strategy to deal with the road network. But of course, I wasn't suggesting that the fuel levy should be used to finance roads across the country. The fuel levy is one of the few sources of government revenue that is ring-fenced. In particular, I was referring to the Road Accident Fund being a beneficiary of that ring-fencing, because many times National Treasury has come back to us and said, look, we don't ring-fence, so don't ask for that, but it does ring-fence. So I want to point out the problem that this money is going to the Road Accident Fund. And I don't think we should be satisfied with the answer that says, let's give the new guys a chance. And the reason for me saying that is because Treasury has stated that the accumulated deficit of the Road Accident Fund is set to be roughly 590 billion Rand by 2022-23. That's 590 billion Rand. So that's an enormous sum of money, honorable members. And if additional revenue is raised by increasing the fuel levy to support an institution that is so obviously financially unsustainable, the point that I'm trying to make is, why can that not be done for capital expenditure, for investment in infrastructure, as my colleague at Kusatu was alluding to? Why can that not be done, as opposed to money being allocated to the Road Accident Fund? So we've said many years ago, we said that the fuel levy can be used as opposed to e-tolls, specifically for the Gauteng Freeway Improvement Project. And that recommendation was not heeded. And so e-tolls was basically pushed forward, and it still is being pushed forward. There's still no resolution about that, but it clearly is not financially sustainable. So in the meantime, a lot of debt has accumulated. But if a measure like what I've proposed, as opposed to allocating money to the Road Accident Fund, allocating it to something like the Gauteng Freeway Improvement Project specifically, that debt would not have accumulated. And that this is all besides very serious allegations of corruption in those kinds of contracts. And again, the secrecy in road tolling concessionaires and their relationship with Sunroll and how much profit they make. Honorable members, that would be something that the public, I think, really needs to see for government to justify any decision to raise additional monies from the public. Thanks very much, Chairperson.
Thank you so much, Mr. Johnson. Matthew, please come in.
No, thanks, Comrade Chair, and thanks to honourable members. So I think just questions from Comrade Honourable Member Dupuy Peters. I think we would agree 100% with the principal point that Comrade Peters was raising, Honourable Peters, that all of us have a responsibility to play a role, to make our contributions, and even to compromise, even to sacrifice at times for a broader good. So I think it doesn't just extend to the issue of parents taking responsibility for their children, but what can all of us do to help rebuild the economy, the state, etc., to survive. I think that's what has motivated us, Comrade Chair, as COSATU, to say during this past year of the pandemic, to release almost 70 billion rand from the Unemployment Insurance Fund, which is workers' funds, into the economy, into workers' pockets, to giving them money to buy food, to keeping companies open, to preventing retrenchments. That's also what motivated us, Comrade Chair, to try to assist Eskom with its issues, including issues of the debt, etc. To say, what can we do to assist our greatest national asset? Even on the economic recovery plan, Comrade Chair, we've looked at issues, what can unions do? Even if they're very small, it's fine, to support local procurement in their own unions, in their sectors, in their bargaining councils, their industries, etc. And I think that's also what's motivated us to support the call from public servants to be allowed for those public servants who don't qualify for bank loans or for RDP housing, the missing middle, so to speak. Let the GPF give them affordable, competitive loans as well. Because Comrade Peters is 100% right. You have police officers who earn 180,000 Rand a year. How would they afford a home loan? It means they're condemned to living in backyards, into shacks, etc. It means people are open to temptation, to corruption, because they're simply struggling to survive. So I think that's something we're pushing. We want the GPF to resolve it soon. That can be a way also to easing the pressure on the wage bill in the state, because you'll be helping public servants who are struggling because of the highly indebted, etc. On the 350 COVID-19 grant, which, I mean, I think, Comrade Chair, all of us support in some form or other, some sort of basic income grant or universal grant. The 350, which covers those who don't receive any other grants from the state, and has many issues. People not receiving it, there's countless problems, that's fine. But with all its imperfections and even its small amount, it still has reached millions of people who otherwise have nothing to buy bread for. And the fact that you have long queues shows people want it. We think, Chair, because we're in a recession, now is when you need to have it. You don't need to have it when the economy is growing, unemployment is decreasing, etc. Chair, and look, the cost at its per month is about 1.8 billion Rand a month. That's less than 20 billion Rand in a year. That basically is equal to about 1.5% of the national budget. We think that's easily manageable without breaking the fiscus, without being reckless with the finances. And we know the state's finances are extremely overstretched, to put it politely. We think it is manageable. Honourable Peters is right to ask, where would funding come from to fund this, 1.5% of the budget? And look, we have to look at the hard solutions. And the hard solution is that we lose hundreds of billions of rands to corruption, wasteful expenditure. I think we've seen the never-ending stories at Eskom, at Transnet, across the board. We can tackle that. I think Eskom has shown a positive way to try to reduce that by going the civil claims route to recovering the stolen monies. I think the fact that Eskom and the government has managed to reduce the Eskom debt by about 80 billion rand in the past year shows you if there's determination, you can start fixing things. We think Honourable Peters is 100% right. There's limited space to increase taxes. We're reaching the tax ceiling on many areas. There are a few areas you can tweak here and there. You could tweak income tax upon those who earn above 1.5 million, etc. But I think the real way to generate more tax revenue is to capacitate SARS, to implement lifestyle audits, to tackle the massive gap between those who are rich and those who don't pay taxes. To tackle specifically customs evasions. 95% of our goods not being inspected for customs duties in our ports can yield hundreds of billions of rands of customs duties. specifically in the clothing imports, tobacco and alcohol as well, which are quite prone to massive pilferage. You would often find, Comrade Chair, in the customs enforcement, even those 5% of goods which are inspected, there's huge amounts of fraud taking place there, where Chinese clothing come in and they underreport the true value of the goods. And because you pay a small little bribe to the official, he will accept that it allegedly cost two rand to produce a suit from China, when we all know in reality, it would have cost at least 1,000 rand, for example. I think those are the much easier ways to do it. We think, Comrade Chair, that there are additional ways to generate savings and thus free up money. Have a single wage agreement for the entire state, not just the 800,000 public servants, but all 1.2 million employees of the state. But again, to start reducing what we pay politicians, the executive office bearers on top, and specifically to put salary caps on what management and the SOEs earn, you can start freeing up money. And I think, Chair, we've tried to assist Governors COSATU, as I mentioned before, around generating money from the UIF, from the GPF, from ESCOM, etc., to say, here's our contribution as workers to assist the very tight finances the state is facing. But I think lastly, Chair, there are other leakages in the state. In the past medium-term expenditure framework, about 13 billion rand was spent on 6 government head offices, building new head offices, and even revamping the consulate in New York. 13 billion rand. That's half of what this 350 grand would cost. Again, you'll see many departments still spending significant amount of money on consultants. So I think if we're committed, we can find those ways to squeeze money, and it really can go to much better use to helping people with 350. The benefit last year, Comrade Chair, of a 350 grant is that money is spent in the local economy on food, electricity, etc. Government itself will get more money back from it, from VAT, from electricity tariffs, etc. It's not lost on wasteful expenditure. But thanks, Comrade Chair. Let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All members, are there any questions which are coming up? I'm taking a second round.
Hlonyana, Chair.
Honorable Hlonyana. Please come in, Honorable Hlonyana.
Okay, thank you very much, Chairperson. To Andile and Zukiswa from the Public Service Accountability Monitor, they spoke about, Chairperson, policy to budget, to spending, to service delivery. And then I just wanted to ask them, as the monitors, what do they think we have a breakdown? Why do we have a breakdown in this process? Why do we have a breakdown from policy to budget to spending, and then to what people are supposed to receive in the end, and they don't receive what they're supposed to receive? I just wanted them maybe to speak further on that, and maybe to explain their understanding us on that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Hlonyana. Honorable Peters, do you have anything? Okay. Let me come.
No, Chair, I'm happy with the responses, but I think, Chairperson, we need, like I said, even in the last public hearings, every time we get inputs from the public about some of the challenges of society, we realize that the time that we allocate is a bit limited and we need more time. I don't know where we can buy that time, but I think we will probably in future have to call them back for some additional engagements. But I'm happy that all of them do have an opportunity to present to portfolio committees, which means that the ears from MPs are more that are listening to their inputs. But when we have to deal with the actual runs and science, we'll have to apply our mind more. But I think with regard to the response from Outer about the issue of the fuel levy for road infrastructure, Outer would know that the issue of GFIP we've always said, even in many years ago, that it is not a transport issue, it is a funding issue. So I'm happy that it's coming to the fore, and probably when transport is busy with their SANRAL or road infrastructure funding model, OUTA would be one of the key participants and COSATU to make their presentations. But of concern, Chairperson, is the deterioration of the roads infrastructure in our municipal areas. And I know that definitely the Minister of Transport, although he said it in the way he said it, and understanding how he said it, but truly speaking, it means that municipalities need to jack up their act about revenue collection. And if inequality and poverty is increasing, it means revenue collection in municipalities would continue being a challenge. So there needs to be a comprehensive approach to road infrastructure funding, not necessarily just looking at the national network. Thank you very much, but I think we are enlightened and happy with the presentations for today, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Peters. Let me just shoot right away the question for Catherine. Quickly, I know you have addressed this, but I'll still ask it nevertheless. I was saying, which grant do you think should be reduced, for instance, to increase the child support grant? And please motivate your answer. I just want to check that how far have you gone with National Treasury, and what type of response you get from them. But I can't agree with you more in the importance of a nation investing in its children, because that's investing in the future human capital, which will be very critical for the economy of our country. Coming to Mr. Johnston, thank you again for your presentation. Again, the question of 4.5 billion rand paid for people who are staying at home, not doing anything. It is a problem, and it is a concern of this committee. That it's the money that the people of South Africa invest without any return. And you'll find that in most cases, it's not even the problem of the people who are suspended. It's the problem of the organizations themselves or government of the SOEs. What they do, they suspend and then start investigating while somebody is staying at home. I don't think it's a workable formula. There are people who have been at home, we are talking about 2 years, others will be at home for about 5-6 years, and that they get paid. Government just don't finish its cases. And I think it boils down to the thing that people are suspended and then people start investigation after that. Whereas it should be the other way around. It results in service delivery being compromised, because in some instances you'll find that these are the executives, whether in government or in our state-owned entities. I think it's something that we should find a way as the committee, portfolio committees and parliament, that there should be a way of dealing with this. And we're saying that being fully aware, COSATU, that there's a constitution in this country and people have got rights, but the leakages that we find in the economy and in the public purse, I don't think it's something that, especially under these conditions, that the people of South Africa can be able to stomach. So I'm quite in agreement that there's just no value for us in that money. In fact, it may be called fruitless and wasteful expenditure in my dictionary. So you are saying you'd like to engage with portfolio committees. I just want to check what's stopping you from engaging with the portfolio committees, because I think if you can just write to any portfolio committee and ask for an audience to present a particular matter, they will be open to that. You are citing a figure of 300 billion rand in the illicit financial flows, and add the base erosion and profit shifting. That number just balloons. But I just wanted to check that, and year in, year out, we talk about this thing. Do you think that it's only a money issue, or there can be other issues? That why are we not addressing this thing? When I'm saying we, I'm talking about institutions which are supposed to be looking at that. Is there other issue that perhaps we are not privy to? Still with you, Matt, you talk about, I would say, if I'll paraphrase you, that the relationship between Sanral and some of the partners in the triple P, that relationship is opaque. What exactly are you saying? Do you mind just giving that statement more oxygen for our understanding? Coming to Public Service Accountability Monitor, Miss Andile and Miss Zukiswa, if I got the name right. The Constitution definitely enjoins us as public reps to engage with the public through their formations or individually. I just want to check one. What do you think? You have proposed a number of ways. My question: don't you think that the ways that you are proposing, they are by and large elitist, and the people who get most affected by the decisions that we take here, the poorest of the poor, the marginalized, end up not being able to engage with this process? And perhaps an added question to that would be, what would you propose? For instance, how do we make sure that as this committee and other committees, we are able to deal with the people who are somewhere in the rural areas? Yeah, what would be a proposal? And taking all the constraints which are there, and one constraint is the question of time generally, but and others. So I would like to hear you on that one. Coming back to COSATU, the public procurement bill went out for public comments. I just want to check, did COSATU make their own inputs as far as the bill is concerned? And would you mind sharing that those inputs with the committee? Another question for COSATU. COSATU used to have a very good research capacity. I don't know whether it's still there, but there are many proposals that we are making, for instance, as far as spending is concerned, the question of basic income grants, the extension of some other grants, more budget for other departments like tourism. I just wanted to check whether, is there any study or model that you are using just to ensure that we don't find ourselves in a debt crisis, debt explosion, and as you correctly say, us losing our sovereignty. So I just want to check whether is there something like that you are doing. Yeah, it's for COSATU again. We as the governing party agree 100% that GPF, as Honorable Peters was saying, should also be used for the benefit of the owners of that money, the workers themselves. But the point I'm making here, you'll agree with me that you'll struggle to find a company on the JSE which is not being funded by PIC. But I hardly hear COSATU talking and on issues which affect private companies, because you are a shareholder ultimately of what is happening in those companies. For instance, when you look at the payments of some of the executives of the companies on the JSE, you'll find that I saw one executive was going out with about 60 million rand payment. What is the position of COSAT as far as private companies are concerned? Because rightly so, you are the ultimate shareholders of most of those companies. Again, COSAT, I just want to check. You presented to the committee some of the proposals that you were coming up with to assist ESCOM. How far is that process? What has happened with that process? Let me just address Ms. Catherine Hall. She asked what happens after your presentation here. One of the things that we do as the committee is that we'll raise your issues with the whole parliament. Say this what came from your good selves. That will appear in our report and in our debates that comes up. But we also interact directly with national treasury and raise these issues. But again, the idea, and you correctly said that yourself, Catherine, that there's MTPPS, right? Some of the issues that we raise now, they get reflected in the MTPPS. But I think it's also very important that government in general must interact with the public. So as parliament, it's our own way, but there's nothing which stops you from interacting with the department and the ministers concerned. I must just say to all the presenters that one of the frustrating things for the committee in particular here is where we come and we raise issues about the need for more budget for certain department or SOEs, but come year end, you find that those institutions have not been able to use that budget. You find a lot of underspending, and you know that some of that money that goes there is the money that we as a country go out and borrow at cost, and then apart from service delivery, which is compromised by not spending the money, the cost of that money, it means again, it falls into the category of wasteful expenditure, because sometimes you find that that money is in the bank and the interest that they get on that money is far less from the interest that government borrows at. So I'm just saying it's one of the things that we deal with as this committee, and I was just saying that it does frustrate, just sharing with you some of the challenges that are not just the challenges of parliament, but they are the country challenges. I think lastly, I would like to follow up on what Honorable Peters was saying about the input that you come up with to us really help us again to deal with some of our blind spots. And it's a very, national government is a very critical level of government. But as you know, that about half of the budget through the Division of Revenue Act goes to the provinces and local governments. And I know that your capacity may not allow you to reach all the local governments that are there. But I think it is a good idea that you also find a way of dealing with the provincial governments. again, I'm very much aware about some capacity limitations of some of the institutions. But for instance, if you were to look at the big spenders, health, education, most of the money gets spent at the level of provinces. We've got a lot of grants again, which goes to provinces, and others go to to local government. So it wouldn't be wasted of time from your side to try and interact with some of those levels of government. Yeah, I think I've raised some questions, and Honorable Hlonyane added something. Please come in the order that you started. So starting with Catherine, and then Matt, Catherine, and then after that it's Miss Ele, Matt, and then Kosatu. Yes.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. You've asked one main question to me. You asked which grant should be reduced to increase the CSG. Well, if my video was on, you would see that I'm smiling. We agree on the need to invest in children, and we are not proposing to redistribute allocations within the social assistance budget. The grants go to people who need them. They go to elderly people who do not have private pensions. They go to disabled people who are unable to work. They go to children in the protection system, where the families need to provide care for them on behalf of the state. And they go to children who are in very poor households. We can't take away from these grants. There's also, as Kosatu particularly has mentioned, an important gap for the unemployed working age. So it's not a matter of taking out of grants. What has happened is that money has been already taken from the social grant budget. We know the Treasury took 36 billion rand out of the social grant budget over the MTF. We heard from our colleagues in Department of Social Development, they were instructed to reduce the budget. Where was that spent? We don't know. We've heard enough about bailouts of SOEs and wasteful expenditure to know that there is fat in the budget somewhere. But certainly government shouldn't be reducing the social grant budget in any respect in a time of a health pandemic and an economic recession. It's the very last place. This country is ultimately about people, and the infrastructure is there to serve them. But we cannot be cutting out of the social grant budget. Thank you very much for clarifying the process after this. We have also engaged with the Social Development Portfolio Committee on the budget, but they are not really able to play a role in amending budgets. And they and the department we were all surprised when the CSG top-up was not included in the budget. Everybody expected that it would have been. The committee worked very hard to pass the Social Assistance Amendment Bill last year in order to make this possible. So there's a communication failure that happens within the different parts of government as well. And the fact that they only found out after the budget decision was made by Treasury again shows why it's very important to open up the budget decision-making process before Treasury makes decisions, or in this case in July, before the decisions about the October budget are made. Yeah, I think that was the only question for me. And thank you again for this opportunity to appear at this committee today.
Thank you, Zukiswa and Ms. Tele, please come in.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Honourable Chair. This is Zukiswa speaking, and if my colleague Andile does want to chip in, she's welcome to, but just giving her a bit of a rest as she's not feeling well. I think I'll begin with the question pertaining to the breakages or the breaks and the links between essentially policy implementation and service delivery. And I'd agree that for us, I think in her overview, Andile shared that our perspective is really using a lens of social accountability. And within that lens, one of the primary areas of focus is the extent to which existing policy, whether it's fiscal policy or otherwise, the aspirations within policy are able to be attained, and with the bottom line being service delivery. There was a recent report on poverty and prosperity that reflected on, globally, but looked at the COVID-19 crisis and, some of the overarching issues that are, persistent in low, to middle income countries are reflected here as well. So the tough challenges really in terms of eradicating inequality and poverty and unemployment and the, kind of service delivery, the issues bedeviling service delivery are central, leadership is central to those. And so for us, the role of, on the one hand, really invested leadership that prioritizes a range of issues, and I'll maybe just quickly speak to those, but we cannot emphasize enough the importance of, solid leadership at all levels, in particular, to make sure that policy aspirations meet service delivery needs. And I think while we are questioning the human rights orientation of the fiscal framework in South Africa, and we are questioning the human rights orientation of the budgets, and I think that's in our submission as well, we also feel that even within existing contexts, there isn't enough done to ensure that there's adequate political and administrative accountability and responsiveness to ensure that service delivery goals are met, that at times the data that exist are not, are not reflective of realities on the ground. And so, of course, you cannot meet service delivery needs if you're not using, credible data, up-to-date information. We also feel that the robustness of implementation whether it is about fiscal policy or service delivery issues, particularly at the provincial level. And Honourable Buthelezi, I think you raise an important point about the local government sphere and the provinces. I think, again, to reiterate the point of inclusive policy making, where the rubber hits the road in relation to service delivery, the feedback loops are inadequate to ensure that that link that Honourable Hlongyangen speaks about between the plans, and there are many plans. We read annual reports, annual performance plans, operational plans, we read all of that. And the link between that and what happens on the ground is missing, and what's missing are the voices of the people that ultimately are impacted. Lastly, in terms of this point as well, the need to nurture social solidarity and public trust. This might seem like a really kind of soft point in terms of the technical considerations of plans and budgets. But I think this is another area for us where the importance of ensuring that the public do have trust in both the elected representatives and the executive to engage in processes of input and so on. So there are capabilities in relation to implementation for us that are fundamental, and leadership speaks to that. The other aspect, and we speak again of the Auditor General's findings. And I think here again, committees have a role to play in that. On the one hand, the ground is laid out, or the gauntlet is laid down by the findings of the AG and the various work relating to that in relation to public finance management. But what we would emphasize to the committee is that there needs to be a much stronger role played, again, by committees themselves, parliamentary oversight being played to call accounting officers and ministers to account where those links do not happen. The questions about why it is they don't happen, I think oversight, or why those links or those breakages exist, oversight again is a fundamental problem, or a fundamental, I think weakness. And I think when we speak of provinces, we do note that, and our work over the years, we have particularly engaged the provincial legislatures in the Eastern Cape, and on another project where we've looked at the extent of openness, the extent of accessibility, and the space for participation in the provincial legislatures is another area, and begins to speak to your second question, or your other question, Honourable Chair, which is about, are we not opening up, or are we not making proposals that are elitist, or for spaces that are elitist in participation? And our answer to that would really be, what we've attempted to do in our written submission is to exactly outline the mechanisms by which those who, for example, are not budget advocates, those who are most directly impacted by poor service delivery and so on, are able to still inform the space. One area that we've looked at in our work, for instance, is the platforms that are offered by the legislatures at the provincial level, relating to taking the program called taking the legislature to the people. And I won't go into detail here, but we've partly gone into that detail to some extent in our written submission, but in other work that we've shared, we've raised ideas for ways in which a platform like that, in which there is an acknowledgement that the people are people beyond the space that we currently have, that the people are people beyond civil society organizations, are people behind organized movements like ours, for instance, or coalitions. So your point is well taken. And I think what we've tried to outline is also the need for public education and awareness. There is no doubt that this is a very technical space, technical process. Budgets are complex, and I think we can't pretend otherwise. And so we've also suggested that perhaps there is a role for public parliamentary education officers and officers to have a much more deeper exploration of the linguistic challenges, for example, that are presented by these kinds of spaces. The zero rating, for example, of online platforms. In this instance, we have found that accessibility to legislatures and committees has been opened up, and so the data costs of engaging is another space. So there are many proposals that we have made, some of which are in the submission, and others we would be happy to share. But certainly our emphasis is precisely to ensure that it's not about the affording and about civil society organizations based in Cape Town, Johannesburg, and Pretoria that have access, but in fact that anyone who has a perspective to share with MPs and committees can do so. The final question then is on ways in which, or the question, I mean, it wasn't a question, it was a comment, and engaging the provinces. We absolutely agree. We do, we work in 6 sub-Saharan countries, but also have a focus, specifically we are based in Makanda. And so for us, the challenges at the provincial level are really important, and engaging the legislatures at the provincial legislatures is also a really important space. And we've been encouraged by recent developments, looking, for example, at introducing provincial amendment bills, powers to amend provincial money bills, which we find, and we've made comments on that, again, emphasizing issues of public participation, transparency, and openness. So I must say, Honorable Chair, that I think, certainly for our organization, the provincial space is a significant one. But of course, the problem is scope and reach. And yeah, there is a limit to that and the reach of our work. But we certainly hope that even at, in the context of engaging the National Assembly and committees of the National Assembly there and the NCOP, there are ways to bridge or to connect those dots. I hope I've answered all the questions. If not, yeah, I can come back.
Thank you, Sugiswa. Matt, do you want to come in?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. And just thank you for all the questions. We're very critical as civil society always, but these engagements, I think, over the years are getting better and more substantive and more constructive. So thank you very much for the questions and the engagement. I won't comment too much on what Honorable Peter said, because you said some similar things, Chairperson, that I'll respond to in order. I just should agree about municipal roads being in a crisis, and that there is, of course, a big role to play for the local authorities and provinces in overseeing how that money is spent. But I'll get to that point in a moment. I want to appreciate your agreement, Chairperson, on money paid to people who have been suspended, not bringing any value to the public. And of course, this is a serious issue, and I think you've alluded to a solution, and I think our colleague from COSATU has also, to say that there needs to be expedited investigation and prosecution. We as an organization have, Chair, we've spent many resources and so much time over the past 5 to 10 years to bring very substantive evidence to law enforcement agencies in order to help them do these exercises more quickly. But that doesn't happen. And I think we need to be frank and we need to be honest that you know, in many instances, these are self-correction issues, and there are devolved powers in government, and the law enforcement agencies have capacity constraints themselves. So in many cases, I think it's an issue of political will to self-correct that needs to come in, that we're not seeing. And of course, it's a problem. We can't just say that people must stay in their positions until investigations are concluded, if those investigations take 2 to 5 years, as you say, because in many instances, the allegations are about money being siphoned off, contracts being inflated, procurement policies being flouted, and all that translates to money being wasted. And I think what other presenters have also alluded to is so important to recognize that there is money, that 2 trillion rand will be spent in this financial year. There is money that we believe is just being misappropriated. And that's why, I mean, at the foundation of what I'm saying is that Parliament does not intervene significantly in what is put forward by the executive arm of government year on year. And what is put forward by the executive arm of government is a function of political decision-making. And that has not changed significantly over time, despite the fact that we've gone through this global pandemic, we've gone through economic recession, and we've gone through crippling corruption. This is still being exposed, Chairperson, but I think the magnitude of what's happened at Eskom and other institutions is only becoming known now, but it's enormous amounts of money. So we don't need to talk about where money is going to come from. Money needs to stop being wasted. And that's the mandate of my organization, at least, is to try and contribute to the abuse of tax revenue being curbed. That's what we're trying to do. So Chair, you asked some specific questions. For example, what's stopping us from engaging with portfolio committees? So we try our very best. We try our very best, and some chairpersons are responsive and some are not. And we've also tried to alleviate that problem. We've engaged with the presiding officers. We're engaging with House chairpersons to say, will you please intervene? Will you please help us to get responses from some chairpersons? Because in some instances, they simply don't feel accountable to anyone in the public. They feel accountable to their political parties. And that's a problem that I think is ongoing. We're talking about that, and that's good. But it's something that still needs to be resolved. But more specifically, Chairperson, and I want to allude to this here in this committee, because I think it can benefit the members here if this were actually to be implemented. What we're recommending specifically is not ad hoc engagements between the public and portfolio committees, but more structured engagement, proactive engagement. And that, for example, what we've been thinking would be making the budget review and recommendation reporting processes of each respective portfolio committee inclusive, by regularly and every year at a predictable point in time, maybe before the MTBPS, to provide a space for people to come and say, look, this is what we think about this department's budget. It's virtually the same as last year, but it hasn't had the impact that we would like to see. And this is maybe why. Will you please intervene? And of course, the committees can only make recommendations. They can't dictate to the executive what must be done. But if the public, if there's solidarity and we're saying, look, this budget is a problem, it's not achieving its intended outcomes, then Parliament surely has the mandate to say, well, then it must change, and then the department must change. So yes, we will continue trying, Chairperson, to engage with departments and municipalities and other authorities directly. The same with National Treasury, but National Treasury has made it clear in all these engagements over the years that they also only have so much capacity, and they also act on political directives to a large extent. So that's really where the decision-making happens, not necessarily in National Treasury, and they would like, I think, to see Parliament play a stronger role to sometimes say no when these budgets come, because that's not happened. You asked about 300 billion in illicit financial flows. Why are we not addressing this issue? Is it just too little funding? And I think it's an important question. Thank you, Chair. I don't think it's only about the money. I don't think it's only about how much money is allocated to the NPA, SARS, and the SIU. But partially, yes, it is. There's definitely a capacity constraint. But what my organization has at least come to believe is that over the past 5 to 10 years and probably beyond, those institutions' capacity were purposefully eroded to facilitate the abuse of tax money. as a part of an organized state capture project. So that's something that obviously allocating more money won't necessarily solve. But we do believe that systematically the right people are being put into those important positions, and that with appropriate resources, that they will be able to fix that issue. But again, Chairperson, I hope that some of the specific recommendations we've made here will hit the road in the sense that, for example, money is being allocated to the State Security Agency, where the public has no idea what that organization does with that money. All we know is allegations of serious mismanagement of assets, while money is not allocated to Statistics South Africa. And surely this committee can make a recommendation that something like that be overturned if it really wants to. And then on SANRAL and their concessionaires' contractual relationships. Chair, you just asked me to elaborate a little bit, so I'll try and be quick. We engaged in litigation on this issue because, and Honorable Peters, you've said we must talk to SANRAL and they must bring us to the table, and we would like nothing more. It is not necessarily this committee or Parliament's problem to say what is happening between SANRAL and whether it be international or domestic private sector partners in how they decide to finance and maintain certain major pieces of infrastructure. But we believe that when it comes to asking people to pay toll fees, that people should know what that money is used for. And right now that's not the case because those contractual agreements are opaque. They do not allow for sharing the terms of those contractual agreements with third parties. And that's a classic private sector argument, but this is SANRAL. It's a public entity, and we believe that through a parliamentary recommendation, they can be told to bring the public to the table so that we can see what's going on, so that they can be held accountable, and that these companies that work for them as subcontractors effectively can be held accountable as well. And yes, finally, the importance of engaging with provincial government. Absolutely, we try and we would like to, but sometimes provincial government are part of the problem. And COCTA is, of course, the custodian of local government. And this institution of parliament does have authority over COCTA, and particularly the portfolio committee. So we would like to see that sort of intervention. And as I've said, SCOPA is one committee that has done that. So they've shown that it can be done. And Chair, let me just say in closing, I'm from a municipality, Masilunyana, in the Free State, where many of these issues that we're talking about manifest. And one can see the issues there, and there's virtually no local government in place. It's basically collapsed, as in many other places. And the one thing that is continuously prioritized when these collapses happen is people still receive their salaries, whether they do their job or not. And I think that's something that absolutely must change. When there's too little money, then, as others have said, social expenditure and expenditure on infrastructure needs to be prioritized. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you so much, Matt. It's Kosatu, if I'm not, yes. Comrade Smith, please come in.
Sure. No, thanks, Comrade Chair. But I think, Comrade Chair, we would agree with the kind of the comments and the principled statements that you made, for example, the endless suspensions you find taking place in the public service, where you have, I think the most notorious case was about the former Chief of Crime Intelligence on suspension for 10 years. And I think, simply just take the principle that justice delayed is justice denied for all parties, but you can't afford to have a shortage of public servants, skilled workers, yet you've got people on suspension in perpetuity. Also, Comrade Chair, Treasury can always correct me if my figures are wrong, but I think it's roughly about 100 billion rand the Treasury government has to spend upon insurance claims, legal claims, especially in the healthcare for malpractice. Those are the kind of wastages that we really need to see management tackling much more decisively, because the state can't afford to waste a single cent. Comrade Chair, on the public procurement bill, we've been waiting for this bill for a very long time. We've raised it with the president in 2019, with Treasury, with the minister, Comrade Mboweni. Government has now availed it, as you said, for public comment. They've committed to bring it to NEDLAC later this year. That's where COSATU will engage. So we normally give space for government to public comments, bring a revised bill to NEDLAC. We're quite keen to see it come through, and we hope it'll be decisive enough and bold enough to address, because the public procurement system, Comrade Chair, not just in the public service departments, but entities, local government, SOEs in particular, are really sieves for wasteful expenditure, for corruption. The horror stories you would hear on those levels are really amazing, Comrade Chair. I think our principal position, we'll be glad to share, and we could even share our initial comment on the bill to yourselves gladly, because we did make a comment already. We want a single, open, transparent public procurement system. It must be binding for the entire state, so not just public service, but include every organ of state. And then if you can do it, you can also then link it to local procurement as well, because you have too many departments, etc., which often give tenders illegally to fronts for imports. And of course, Chair, we think it also helped to affect the economies of scale and save money for the fiscus as well. Comrade Chair, in terms of our research, we'll be glad to share some of the research we've done on the economy, on interventions, public service wage bill, etc., with members. And I think we would agree with Treasury that we have to get the debt trajectory under control. We can't have this kind of massively increasing trajectory from 57%, possibly to 80, 90%, because we're very wary of going the Greek route, where you lose your sovereignty as a country. Then the IMF or whomever we have to go to for bailout will impose conditions of austerity, which will be so brutal that it'll make the situation far worse. I think for us, Comrade Chair, it's even while we had drafted as COSATU our economic intervention package proposals to the lines in October 2019, which is say, how can we help to address the fiscal leakages from corruption, from the SOEs, wasteful expenditure, even bloated management in the state, to recapacitating SARS, growing the economy, etc. Because, Chair, look, it's fine for us to criticize government, but we need government to function. We're not isolated from the well-being of the state. Comrade Chair, I would agree with you 500% on your comments on the PIC and on the need for shareholder activism, including from us as unions, from the PIC, from the fund managers, because that's, to be honest, something that we've all been found badly wanting. I think we saw, Comrade Chair, in the 5th Parliament, how we were found wanting on Steinhoff. PIC was a large shareholder in Steinhoff, but you found that the PIC reps themselves didn't even attend the Steinhoff meetings after the explosion of corruption that was exposed, you know. We've seen companies where the PIC is a majority shareholder, what you call payday lending companies, which target public servants, exploit their vulnerability. Yet the PIC is a majority shareholder there. It makes no sense. So we would agree with you. And as part of organized labor's commitments under the economic recovery plan, we've now embarking on training of union reps, but even of our investment fund trustees of union investment funds, pension fund trustees from labor, to say, can they not embrace a spirit of shareholder activism? Can they not tackle the issues that you're seeing of excessive executive wage packages, the wage gap, local procurement, corruption, prioritizing local investments, things which will grow the economy, because they can't simply collect their allowances for sitting on boards and not champion these things which all of us are calling for and which we desperately need. We're taking it as not just a COSATU program, but as in collaboration with other federations at NEDLAC, like FEDUSA and NACTU, because we're all on the same page. We are having virtually weekly meetings at NEDLAC with government on the various commitments around economic recovery plan, from local procurement to SME financing, to transport, to energy, etc. Because we need these things to succeed. We can't afford for government to fail. I think, Comrade Chair, also on the executive wage gap, there's a companies amendment bill which is currently at NEDLAC with DTI and NEDLAC, which seeks to require companies in future to disclose the wage gap. So what you pay a CEO, what you pay the cashier, the lowest paid worker. I know colleagues in business are not keen on it, but we think that we shouldn't be afraid of transparency. And as you said, many of these companies, the PIC is a shareholder. These are requirements of the JSC. And if we want to have an equal, just society, then everybody needs to play their bit, including the private sector. And lastly, Comrade Chair, I would agree with you 100%. And I know it's a difficult thing. How does Parliament hold government to account for under expenditure? I think that's really where political leadership has to come in, that we build a culture that if a minister or an MEC or mayor or a DG or manager fails to deliver without good reasons, they should be released. So I think that culture needs to be built, Comrade Chair. And obviously look at us as unions. we've been engaging our affiliates that they also need to start blowing the whistle on these malpractices where they organize, because it is workers who suffer at the end of the day. But yeah, thanks, Commissioner. I hope I answered the questions.
Yebo. Thank you so much to all the presenters. What I can assure you is that our meeting with your good selves is not a tick box exercise. We do follow up on these things, and I know the committee will be taking up these things. They will be there in our parliamentary report, but apart from reports, we also ask departments to come and report back on some of the issues that we raise with them on behalf of the public. But thank you very much, and that takes us to the end of the presentations. You can remain on the platform. This is your parliament. I'm now jumping to the next agenda item. Darren, are there any announcements you are making?
Chairperson, no, nothing from me, except we have another meeting at 2 o'clock with the Department of Higher Education.
Okay, thank you very much. All members, please let me see you at 2 o'clock. I can hear that today, Darren, definitely your computer is having a problem. I think we need to attend to that. But honorable members, thank you very much. This brings us to the end of this session.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Shanyana.
See you later, Chair.
Thank you very much.
In Berlin, where I live with friends, I haven't seen one.